Smiled. That was the part that broke him, not the betrayal itself. Not the lies layered beneath 5 years of carefully constructed trust. What shattered Adrian Kwon, a man who had built an empire on reading people, on knowing when something was wrong, before the wrong thing ever happened, was the smile on his fiancée's face the moment she learned his assistant had vanished. Not worry, not confusion, not even the polite performance of concern she might have offered for appearances. Just satisfaction, clean and cold and unmistakable. And in that single unguarded second, Selena Rhee showed him something she never meant to show. She already knew. If that were you, if the person you trusted most looked pleased when someone close to you disappeared, what would you do? Could you keep smiling back? Could you pretend you didn't see what you just saw? Adrian Kwon couldn't answer that question either. Not yet. But before this night was over, everything he thought he knew about his life, his family, and the people standing beside him would be gone. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because this channel is where stories like this one live. Stories about loyalty and betrayal, about the people everyone overlooks and the price paid when the wrong people finally get noticed. Drop a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this one moves you, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more than you know. Now, let's go back to 2:07 in the morning. The door didn't just open. It came apart. Adrian Kwon hit it with his shoulder at full force, and the cheap deadbolt gave with a sound like a gunshot, one sharp crack that echoed through the narrow hallway of a building that had clearly never expected a man like him to walk through it. He stood in the doorway for exactly 1 second, breathing hard, and looked at what was in front of him. This was where she lived. 5 years. 5 years Imani Cross had been the first person he called in the morning and the last voice he heard before a deal closed at night. She knew his flight schedules, his rivals' weaknesses, the names of every mid-level manager in his shipping network, and which shipping inspectors were on payroll versus which ones were genuine threats. She had managed the operational infrastructure of an organization worth hundreds of millions of dollars without ever once making him feel like she was doing him a favor. And this was where she came home. The apartment was small in a way that felt almost aggressive, not just modest, but deliberately compressed, like someone had taken a normal life and squeezed it down to its absolute minimum. The furniture was old but clean, ruthlessly clean. A second-hand couch with a carefully placed throw blanket that probably covered a worn armrest. Kitchen table that wobbled slightly on one leg, steadied by a folded piece of cardboard wedged underneath. A small bookshelf organized with the same quiet precision Imani brought to every document she ever handed him. And on that kitchen table, stacked in a neat pile that somehow made them worse to look at, were the bills. Medical statements, collection notices, payment plans on payment plans. Adrian picked up the top one without thinking, turned it over, and felt something shift in his chest that he didn't immediately recognize, because he almost never felt it. Shame. He set the paper back down exactly where he found it. He told himself he was here for information. He told himself this was business that Imani had disappeared 24 hours ago, that nobody on his team had any explanation, and that the only thing connecting her absence to something deliberate was the smile he could not seeing on Selena's face. He was lying to himself, and he knew it. He moved deeper into the apartment. The kitchen, a small bathroom, a bedroom barely large enough for the narrow bed inside it, and on the nightstand, a framed photograph of a woman who looked like Imani but older, softer. Seated in what appeared to be a care facility with fluorescent lighting and a window that probably looked out onto nothing in particular. Her mother. He hadn't known about her mother. He stood there for a long moment in the silence of a place that had never expected him and probably didn't want him, and he tried to remember the last time he had asked Imani anything about her personal life. Any question at all. Anything that wasn't directly related to a cargo manifest or a corporate filing or a situation that required immediate management. He couldn't remember one. The bathroom door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open, and there she was. Imani Cross was on the floor with her back against the bathtub, one arm folded across her ribs, The other hand curled around something small and dark that he couldn't see clearly. Her face, a face he had looked at, across a desk, 5 days a week for 5 years, without ever really looking, was swollen on the left side, in a way that made his vision go briefly white at the edges. Her lip was split. There was dried blood on her collar, and the angle of her body against the tub told him she had either fallen or crawled there and hadn't been able to get back up. She was breathing. Barely, it seemed, but she was breathing. Adrian dropped beside her before the thought fully formed. His knees hit the tile, and he didn't notice. He put 2 fingers against her throat and found her pulse fast and thin but real, and something inside him that had been coiled tight since he found that smile on Selena's face finally released into something else entirely. Imani. His voice came out lower than he intended. Rougher, her eyes moved beneath closed lids. Imani. It's Adrian. I'm here. Her eyes opened. Not fully. Just barely. Like the effort cost her something she couldn't spare. For a second, she just looked at him, and he couldn't tell if she recognized him or if she was too far gone to register anything clearly. Then her fingers, the hand wrapped around the small dark object, tightened. Her grip found his wrist. It was stronger than it had any right to be. Don't marry Selena. The words came out slow and wrecked, like she'd been saving them. Adrian stayed very still. It's a trap. Then she pressed the flash drive into his palm. Her hand went slack. Her eyes closed. He didn't call anyone. That was the first decision he made, and he made it in the span of about 4 seconds, while crouching on the bathroom floor of his assistant's apartment with an encrypted drive in his fist and the sound of her breathing coming in and out in a way that made him want to put his fist through the wall. He thought about calling his head of security. He thought about calling the private physician who handled things that didn't require official records. He thought about the 12 people who theoretically formed his inner circle and had access to his calendar and his locations and his routines. And then he thought about the smile. He called one person. Elias Moon answered on the second ring, which was unusual, only because it was almost 3 in the morning and most people were asleep. Elias was not most people. I need you, Adrian said. Bring the doctor. No one else. Location? Adrian gave it to him. 20 minutes, Elias said, and hung up. In those 20 minutes, Adrian sat on the bathroom floor next to Imani Cross and did not move. He didn't go through her apartment. He didn't examine the drive. He didn't make another call or send a message or do any of the 50 things his brain was already preparing to do. He just sat there. He watched her breathe. He looked at the woman he had employed for 5 years and seen every single day and genuinely, legitimately knew almost nothing about. He noticed things that he had no memory of ever noticing before. The small scar near her left temple. The way her hands looked not the hands of someone who spent all day on a keyboard, but the hands of someone who worked, who carried things, who held things together with those hands, long after they should have let go. He noticed that she was still holding the drive even after she'd given it to him. Her hand had been so tightly wrapped around it that the indentations were still there in her palm. He thought, whatever is on this thing, she held on to it through all of this. Through whatever they did to her, she held on to it, and she held on to consciousness long enough to find that wrist and give it to him and say those 2 sentences. He thought, she knew they were going to come back. He thought, she waited for me anyway. Elias arrived in 19 minutes. The doctor, a quiet Korean man named Park, who had never asked Adrian a single question he wasn't paid to ask, was with him. They moved Imani to the safe house on Staten Island, a property not registered under any name connected to Adrian. Purchased through a shell, 3 levels, removed from anything traceable, and Park spent 2 hours doing what he could without a hospital. Broken ribs, bruised kidney, contusion on the left side of her face, consistent with something harder than a fist. She would need time and rest, and what she was going to get instead was a medical cot in a secure location, and the knowledge that the people who had done this to her believed she was dead, or close enough that it didn't matter. Adrian told the doctor to keep her comfortable and stepped out into the hallway. Elias followed. They stood there for a moment, the way 2 men stand when they've known each other long enough that silence doesn't require explanation. Who knows, Elias asked. You, Park, me, Selena? No. Elias nodded slowly. You think she's connected? It wasn't a question, but Adrian answered it anyway. I think Selena saw something she shouldn't have been happy about, and she was happy about it. He paused. I think we're going to find out why. She woke up 6 hours later. Adrian was in the rooms when it happened, not hovering, just sitting in a chair in the corner with the drive in his hand and a laptop that couldn't decrypt it without the right credentials. He had been sitting there long enough that his back ached and the coffee Elias had was long cold. Imani's eyes opened and she stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Safe house, she said. Her voice was gravel. Staten Island. Who else knows I'm alive? Elias. The doctor. Good. She tried to push herself up and made a sound that she immediately stopped making, jaw locked, like she was furious at herself for making it. Don't help me. He hadn't moved. She got herself upright, slowly, one hand braced against the metal frame of the cot. By the time she was sitting, she was breathing through her nose in careful, measured increments, and the color in her face had shifted from gray to something slightly less alarming. Give me the drive, she said. It needs a password. I know. She held out her hand. He gave it to her. She typed a sequence into the laptop that he couldn't follow entirely, something long, something she clearly had memorized, and then the drive mounted, and the file tree appeared on the screen, and she turned the laptop so he could see. He looked at the files for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, How long have you had this? 6 weeks, 6 weeks. He repeated it, like he was testing whether the number made sense. It didn't. You were building this for 6 weeks and you didn't. I needed it to be complete, she said. Incomplete evidence gives them room to maneuver. I needed it to be the kind of thing they couldn't talk their way out of. He wanted to argue with her. He understood, on some rational level, exactly why she had done it the way she had done it, and that understanding did not make him any less furious about it, and he kept both of those things inside and looked at the files. Bank transfers, dozens of them, moving through shell companies that traced back, after several careful layers of corporate structure, to 2 names he knew better than almost any others in his life. Victor Rhee, his future father-in-law, and Gabriel Kwon, his uncle, his mentor, the man who had appeared at the worst moment of Adrian's life, when he was 12 years old, and had just lost everything that mattered, and had pulled him up out of the wreckage and taught him how to survive. Walk me through it, Adrian said. His voice was completely flat. He didn't trust anything else to come out. Imani walked him through it. The transfers were the foundation. Shell companies controlled jointly by Victor's organization and a series of holdings that on paper belonged to third parties but were actually operated by Gabriel's people. That was the money trail. But the money trail alone could be argued, corporate restructuring, legitimate business interests, 100 different explanations that a good lawyer could deploy with a straight face. The rest of it was different. Selena's voice, recorded on a call with a man who worked for her father. She was discussing the post-wedding celebrations. Specifically, she was discussing which of Adrian's cargo vessels would be used for the private party. She was discussing the guest list, which had been significantly altered from the one Adrian had approved. She was discussing the timeline. She was not discussing these things like a bride planning a honeymoon. She was discussing them like someone coordinating logistics. Crew, Imani said. She opened another file. The original manifest was modified 2 weeks ago. I found the revision history in the shipping management system. Every trusted crew member on the vessel assigned to post-wedding celebrations has been replaced. She let that land for a second. Replaced by men who don't appear in any of our employment records. But their service histories appear in payroll documents for 3 of Victor Rhee's subsidiary companies. Adrian looked at the manifest. He looked at it for a long time. I'd disappear at sea, he said. After you sign the marriage contracts, Imani said, which transfer certain oversight provisions buried in the boilerplate on page 47 of the agreements your legal team received, giving Victor a right of first acquisition on core shipping. Assets in the event of your death or incapacitation. And Gabriel controls the organization during the transition period specified in your succession clause. The one he helped you write 3 years ago. She paused. He argued for that language, if you remember. He said it was about protecting the business in an emergency. Adrian remembered. He remembered thinking it was reasonable. He remembered thinking Gabriel knew better than him about these things. He sat back in the chair and looked at the water-stained ceiling and felt something he didn't have a word for exactly, not grief yet, not rage yet, something that existed in the space before both of them, something cold and specific and deeply, violently personal. Selena knew about this when we met, he said. It wasn't a question. I believe so, Imani said carefully. I haven't confirmed. How long have they been running her? A pause. I'm still working on the timeline. He nodded once slowly. Okay, he said. He stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at nothing. The safe house backed onto a lot that was empty at this hour, and dim and uninteresting, and he stood there until he was sure the thing moving around inside his chest had settled into something he could actually work with. Then he turned around. I'm going to go back, he said. Imani looked at him. The wedding stays on, he said. Selena doesn't know I found you. Gabriel doesn't know I found you. As far as anyone in that organization knows, you are missing, and I am grieving, and I am focused on getting married in 3 weeks. He walked back to the chair. They will not see us coming. For the first time since she'd woken up, something shifted in Imani's face that wasn't pain. They'll be watching you closely, she said. You'll have to be very convincing. I know. You'll have to sit across from Selena and talk about flowers. I know. You'll have to let Gabriel put his arm around you. He looked at her. I know, he said again, and his voice was still flat. And what was underneath it, in the part he kept locked, was something that would have to wait. Imani looked at him for a long moment. All right, she said quietly. Then here's what we're going to do. The next morning, Adrian Kwon walked into his headquarters, building at 8:45, slightly later than his usual 8:15, which was a deliberate choice. A small signal of distraction that people would notice and file away, and said nothing to anyone about where he had been the night before. His assistant's desk was empty. He looked at it when he walked past, the way he would have looked at it anyway, the way anyone would have, and kept walking. In his office, Elias was waiting. The door closed. The silence held for exactly 3 seconds. Then Adrian put both palms flat on his desk and looked at the man who had been his head of security for 9 years and said, We have maybe 3 weeks. Tell me everything you've seen in the organization over the past 2 months that felt slightly wrong, but not wrong enough to act on. Elias settled into the chair across from him. That's going to be a long list, he said. Good, Adrian said. Start from the beginning. 3 nights later, he had dinner with Selena. She had chosen the restaurant, a place on the Upper East Side where the lighting was flattering, and the tables were spaced far enough apart that you could pretend conversations were private. She was already there when he arrived, already looking exactly like what she appeared to be, beautiful, composed, appropriately worried about the groom, who had been quieter than usual in recent days. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. You seem tired, she said. The Imani situation, I know it's weighing on you. It is, he said. She squeezed his hand. She'll turn up. People like that. A small pause, a careful choice of words. People in the positions she was in, with access to the things she had access to, sometimes they make choices. Personal choices. It's not a reflection on you. He looked at her. Selena Rhee had extraordinary eyes. That had been the first thing he noticed about her, the night they met at an industry gala that he had attended out of obligation and had intended to leave within an hour. She had a way of looking at people that felt specific, like she was seeing something in you that you hadn't quite seen in yourself yet. He had thought, once, that it was one of the things he loved about her. Now he understood it was a trained skill. You're probably right, he said. She smiled. He smiled back. Underneath the table, his hand was absolutely steady. Later that night, alone in the safe house while Elias reviewed surveillance feeds, and the doctor checked on Imani's vitals, Adrian sat in a plastic chair at a plastic table with a cup of instant coffee he hadn't touched and thought about the word family. He thought about what it meant. He thought about the 12-year-old version of himself, sitting in a state building, being asked questions by a woman with a clipboard about whether he had any living relatives, And Gabriel walking through that door, with his hands in his pockets, and something in his face that had looked at the time like sorrow. He thought about what Gabriel had built with him, not for him with him. That had always been the distinction Gabriel made. He had never let Adrian feel like a charity case. He had worked alongside Adrian, taught him, challenged him, argued with him across tables in rooms where the arguments actually mattered. He had also helped him write the succession clause. He had also attended the gala where Adrian met Selena. He had also been alone with Adrian's father in the months before the accident. Adrian picked up the coffee cup. He set it back down without drinking from it. He sat in the silence of a safe house he had never intended to need, in a life that had been real enough to him until 48 hours ago, and he allowed himself exactly 2 minutes to feel the full weight of what was happening. 2 minutes. Then he picked up his phone and called Elias. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "bring everything we have. We're going to plan this down to the last second. And if they see us coming, then we make sure what they see is the groom," Adrian said. He hung up. He looked at the closed door of the room where Imani Cross was sleeping, held together with medical tape and stubbornness, keeping evidence safe that she had collected at the cost of everything she had quietly absorbed without ever telling him. He thought about the bills on her kitchen table. He thought about the photograph on the nightstand. He thought about 5 years. He stood up, walked to the door, and knocked softly. No answer. She was asleep. He stood there for a moment anyway. Then he walked back to the table, picked up the cold coffee, and finally drank it. It was terrible. He drank the whole thing. There was still so much work to do. Cold coffee was still sitting in his stomach when dawn broke over Staten Island. Adrian hadn't slept. He'd told himself he would 2 hours, maybe 3. Enough to keep his head clear, and instead he'd spent the night in that plastic chair, going through files on the laptop until his eyes felt like they'd been scrubbed with sandpaper. By the time pale gray light started pushing through the single window of the safe house kitchen, he had a legal pad covered in handwriting, so compressed it barely looked like his own, and a list of names that kept getting longer in a way that made his jaw tighten every time he added one. Elias arrived at 6:45 with 2 cups of actual coffee from a diner 3 blocks away and said nothing about the fact that Adrian was wearing the same clothes he'd had on the night before. That was one of the things Adrian had always valued about Elias Moon. The man had an instinct for when language was just noise. They spread everything across the kitchen table, the files, the legal pad, a printed organizational chart of Adrian's shipping operation that Elias had brought in a cardboard tube, and they worked through it the way you work through something that can get you killed if you miss a detail. Slowly, carefully, without the luxury of assuming anything was safe to skip. 11 compromised, Elias said, tapping the chart at 4 different points. That I can confirm. 3 in logistics, 1 in the legal department, 2 in port operations, and 4 whose access levels I don't like. Not confirmed. But I don't like them. Why didn't you flag them before? Elias looked at him. It was a flat look, not defensive, not apologetic. Because they weren't doing anything obviously wrong. They were doing slightly wrong things in patterns that only look like a pattern when you're already looking for one. Adrian understood that. He understood it in the specific way that you understand something that you wish you'd understood 3 months earlier, which is a particular kind of understanding that doesn't feel good. "All right," he said, "we leave them in place. We don't move anyone. We don't change access levels. We don't do a single thing that reads like we're running a counter-operation." Elias nodded. "When do we tell Imani?" "She's already awake," said a voice from the doorway. They both turned. Imani was standing in the doorframe with one hand on the wall, not because she needed the wall entirely, but because her ribs were still cracked, and walking from the back room had cost her something she wasn't going to say out loud. She was wearing an oversized sweatshirt that was probably Elias's, and she had dark circles under her eyes that no amount of sleep would fix quickly, and she looked at the organizational chart on the table, like she was reading a map she'd already memorized. "Who are the 4 you're not sure about?" she asked Elias. He told her. She thought about it for roughly 4 seconds. "Drop 2 of them off the list." The other two, yes. I flagged them 6 weeks ago. I just couldn't move without tipping off whoever was watching my access logs. Someone was monitoring your access logs? Adrian said. She looked at him. Someone's been monitoring mine for the last 8 weeks. Every file I opened got an internal timestamp review. I noticed it on week 3. She moved to the table, lowered herself into a chair, with the careful economy of someone managing pain they refused to announce, and pulled the laptop toward her. I started running my searches differently after that. Compartmentalized. Different access points. Different hours. Different devices. Elias said, "That's why the evidence is clean. That's why the evidence exists at all," she said. "If I'd kept working the normal way, they would have found out what I knew before I had enough to matter." Adrian sat down across from her. "I need to ask you something," he said. She looked at him steadily. "The night they came for you. You knew they were coming, didn't you?" It wasn't quite a question. Imani didn't answer immediately. She looked at the table, at the organizational chart, at something that wasn't in the room. "I thought I had another day," she said finally. "I was wrong about the timeline. I underestimated how quickly they'd move once they confirmed I'd been in the shipping system." She paused. "I should have been gone before they got there. But you weren't." "No. Why not?" She looked up at him, and something in her face was very still. The face goes still when a person is deciding what version of the truth to give. "Because I hadn't finished the file yet," she said. It was true. Adrian could tell it was true. It was also, he was fairly certain, not the whole truth, and he made a decision to let that sit for now, because they had more immediate things to deal with, and because whatever the rest of it was, it belonged to her. "Okay," he said, "then let's talk about what we do with what you finished." They spent 4 hours at that table. By the end of it, the legal pad was full, and they'd started on the back of the organizational chart, and the coffee was gone, and nobody had eaten anything, which none of them mentioned because there were more important things to keep track of than hunger. The plan that emerged was not elegant. Adrian had built his reputation on clean operations moves that had single points of contact, minimal exposure, no more moving pieces than necessary. What they were constructing instead was a thing with too many variables and a timeline that could be collapsed by any number of factors outside their control. But it was what they had. Imani would continue building the case, adding layers and redundancy to the evidence from the safe house. Elias would quietly secure the loyalty of a small number of people within the organization, 4, maximum whose positions were critical to the final move. Adrian would go back to being the groom. 3 weeks, Elias said. "We have 3 weeks before the wedding. 20 days. Imani corrected, not looking up from the laptop. "The ceremony is on a Saturday. The contracts are signed at the pre-celebration dinner the Thursday prior." The Thursday, Elias stopped, looked at Adrian. "You're signing 2 days before." "Which is when I have to move," Adrian said. "Not after the wedding. Before." Imani's fingers paused on the keyboard. "If you move before the signing," she said carefully, "you forfeit the evidentiary value of the full conspiracy. You get them on attempted fraud. Maybe, depending on what a prosecutor wants to argue." "I know. If you wait until the ceremony itself." "I know what I'm waiting for," he said. "I know exactly how long I have to keep smiling at the table." The room was quiet for a moment. "All right," Imani said, and her voice was very even. "Then we wait." He drove back to Manhattan in the early afternoon. The city looked the same, as it always did, the same mid-morning traffic, the same particular smell of the bridge, the same skyline doing what it always did, which was stand there, looking permanent. Adrian had grown up understanding that permanent was an illusion. The city kept renewing that lesson for him. He went to his apartment, showered, changed, and was in his office by 2. His assistant's desk was still empty. The woman who had been fielding calls in Imani's absence, a temp from the pool, competent, unobtrusive, looked up when he walked past and said, "Miss, Ree called twice this morning. She said it wasn't urgent." "I'll call her back," he said. He went into his office and closed the door and called Gabriel instead. Gabriel picked up on the first ring, which he always did when Adrian called. That had always seemed like attentiveness. Now it seemed like something else. "Adrian." His uncle's voice was warm. It had always been warm. That was the hardest thing to sit with the warmth, was not entirely performed. Some part of Gabriel Kwon genuinely loved the boy he'd raised, and that love existed in parallel with everything else, and that was more disturbing than if the whole thing had been cold-blooded from the start. I wanted to hear your voice, Adrian said, which was both true and a lie at the same time. Things are moving fast with the wedding. I feel like I haven't talked to you properly in weeks. I know, a pause. How are you holding up with Imani? Still no news. These things sometimes, Gabriel trailed off. I don't want to say something that sounds callous. She was very capable. She may have had more going on personally than we knew. Maybe, Adrian said. Are you managing without her? Getting there, Adrian said. I might actually need to lean on you a bit more in the next few weeks. Before the wedding, with everything moving, the pause on Gabriel's end was less than a second. Most people wouldn't have clocked it. Of course, Gabriel said. Whatever you need. I know, Adrian said. He hung up. He sat at his desk and looked at his hands for a moment, then picked up the phone again and called Selena. She met him for lunch the following day, at her suggestion. Place in Midtown she liked, airy and expensive, the kind of restaurant that believed presentation was a form of moral seriousness. She was already there, already beautiful, already wearing an expression of warm concern that she had clearly rehearsed in the way someone rehearses a look they need to maintain over time. You look better, she said when he sat down. Slept, he said. Finally. Good. She reached across and touched his hand, the same gesture as the night before, and he let his hand stay where it was. I've been thinking about you, about us. The timing of everything is just, she exhaled. A lot, it is. I'm glad we're doing it anyway. He looked at her. Selena Rhee had a particular talent that he had mistaken, for years, for a form of intimacy. She made you feel like you were the specific subject of her attention. Like whatever you were saying was the most interesting thing she had encountered all day. She deployed it with a precision that was almost scientific, and until approximately 72 hours ago, he had assumed this was simply who she was. Now he understood it was how she'd been trained to hold a target in place. I'm glad too, he said. They ordered. They talked about flowers. They talked about the seating arrangement for the ceremony, which was apparently more politically complex than 3 of the actual business deals Adrian had closed this quarter. Selena had opinions about which of Adrian's associates could not be seated within 4 tables of which of her father's business connections, and she delivered these opinions with the focused energy of someone who had put genuine thought into logistics, which of course she had. He ate his food. He asked questions. He laughed twice once, genuinely, once not, and he was quietly disturbed by the fact that he couldn't always tell which was which anymore. When she excused herself to use the restroom, he watched her walk across the restaurant and pulled out his phone and typed a single message to Elias. Need Selena's call records for the last 3 months. Everything. Every number. He put the phone away before she came back. Call records took Elias 4 days to obtain. In those 4 days, Adrian attended 2 wedding planning sessions, 1 dinner with Victor Rhee that felt like eating a meal in a room where the ceiling was slowly descending, and a Saturday lunch with Gabriel at the older man's home in Brooklyn, the house where Adrian had grown up, where his bedroom still had the same window that looked out onto a backyard that was too small for the neighborhood it pretended to belong to. Gabriel made dumplings. He did this whenever he wanted to remind Adrian of something of the early years, of the particular texture of being a kid in that kitchen, learning how to fold the dough correctly, of the nights Gabriel had sat across from him at that same table and explained the world in terms a grieving 12-year-old could absorb. Adrian ate the dumplings. He complimented them. He watched Gabriel's face the entire time, looking for something he couldn't name, precisely some crack in the surface, some moment when the man he knew leaked through the architecture of everything he'd built on top of it. There wasn't one. Gabriel was very good. You seem more settled, Gabriel said, refilling his tea. I was worried about you earlier in the week. I was in my head too much, Adrian said. That's always been your issue. Gabriel said it fondly. You inherited it from your father, you know. He would sit with a problem until it ate him. He couldn't let things go. Adrian looked at him. "What do you think happened to my parents?" he said. It was not a question he had ever asked Gabriel directly. Not in 20-some years. He had asked it as a child, been given an answer about road conditions and a curve in the highway, and had eventually stopped asking, because stopping was easier than carrying the absence of a better answer. Gabriel set down the teapot. "A terrible accident," he said. His voice was exactly right, measured, a little sad, the voice of a man who had carried grief for decades. "On a night with bad weather. Were you close to him? At the end?" Pause. Shorter than it should have been. "We'd had some disagreements," Gabriel said, "about the direction of the business. Your father was—" He paused again, choosing. "He was principled. Sometimes principles in business don't agree. But you resolved it." "More or less," Gabriel said. "We were working toward it." Adrian nodded. He picked up his tea. He looked at the window above the kitchen sink, the one that had always caught afternoon light in a way that made the room look warmer than it was. "More or less," he said. He drank his tea. Gabriel watched him with eyes that had been reading him for 20 years and found nothing in his face that wasn't supposed to be there. The call records arrived on a Thursday evening. Elias came to the safe house and put the printed sheets on the table in front of Imani, who had spent the last 4 days in a state of controlled, furious productivity that had produced 3 additional verified evidence threads. A complete map of the shell company network, and what she described as a redundancy package, copies of everything, encrypted and distributed across 4 separate locations, with retrieval protocols that only she and Adrian knew. Her face had healed slightly in the way bruises do, moving from dark purple to an ugly greenish yellow that somehow looked worse, even though it was better. She moved more carefully than she had a week ago, which meant the ribs were healing, and she was respecting them more, which was progress. She looked at the call records. She was quiet for a long time. Then she put her finger on a number that appeared on page 3. "This one," she said. Elias leaned over to look. "Whose is it?" "Burner," she said. But the timing, she traced the dates with her finger. 3 calls in the 48 hours before Imani's apartment was accessed. 1 call 11 minutes after Adrian had mentioned, in a private conversation with Selena, where he planned to be that evening. "She called this number 11 minutes after you told her your schedule." Adrian looked at the sheet. He had told to Selena his schedule that night. He remembered it clearly. They had been in the car, his car, and he had mentioned offhand where he was going to be because she had asked if he wanted company, and he had said he had a meeting. "Who does the burner connect to?" Elias said. "Working on it," Imani said. She was already on the laptop. "Give me an hour." She had it in 40 minutes. The burner connected it to a phone registered to the holding company that appeared in 2 shell structures from the original evidence. The holding company had a registered agent whose name appeared in 3 of their documents Imani had already flagged. That registered agent was on Victor Ree's personal payroll. The room was very quiet, so Selena called her father's man, Elias said, "After you told her where you'd be. And my people went to Imani's apartment that same night," Adrian said. "Her people," Imani said flatly, "or Victor's, or Gabriel's. The distinction matters less than the chain." "The chain is clear enough," Adrian said. He stood up and walked to the window and stood there with his hands in his pockets and looked at the dark lot outside and breathed. Just breathed. In and out, slow and deliberate. Behind him, Elias and Imani were quiet. "She used the conversation in my own car to have you beaten," he said. He did not say it with particular inflection. He said it like a man reading something aloud from a document, carefully, word by word. Nobody responded, because there was nothing to add. He turned around, Imani. His voice was steady. "The recording of Selena with Victor's man, how clear is it?" "Clear enough," she said. "They use first names twice. There's a reference to the vessel by name. The date and time are logged in the metadata. And the transfers? Gabriel's side? Authorization codes on 11 separate transactions going back 14 months, she said. 3 of those transactions have Gabriel's personal digital signature on the approval. Not a proxy. Him. That's what you needed 6 weeks for, he said. I needed it to be the kind of thing they couldn't talk their way out of, she said again. The same words as before, but this time they landed differently. This time he understood what she meant by them, at a cellular level. She hadn't just been building evidence. She had been building a cage. "All right," he said. He came back to the table. He sat down. He looked at both of them. "Now tell me about the wedding venue." Elias pulled out a folder. The wedding venue was a ballroom in Lower Manhattan, a historic property that had been booked 8 months ago, 200 years old, recently renovated, famously acoustically complex. Adrian had been to the walkthrough with Selena and had found it beautiful in a way that had felt, at the time, like a sign of something. He understood now it had been selected for operational reasons. Elias tapped a diagram. "This is where the problem is. The venue is a dead zone for wireless signals above the first floor. It's not the building, it's something installed inside it." He looked at Adrian. "Specifically, something installed in the past 4 weeks. A jammer," Imani said. "Found it in a maintenance inspection I ran yesterday," Elias said. "Commercial grade. Positioned on the second level in a utilities closet. Covers the entire ballroom and most of the adjacent space." The plan they had built included a wireless broadcast. Evidence pushed live to every screen in the building at the moment Adrian stopped the ceremony. Without the wireless connection, the plan was a man standing at an altar holding a flash drive. "They anticipated this," Imani said. She wasn't alarmed. She was furious, but it was a cold fury, the kind that thinks instead of combusts. "They installed it before they knew our full plan. Which means they've been running their own counter-operation. Or they assumed I might try to expose them publicly," Adrian said, "and planned for the obvious countermeasure. Same result either way," Elias said. "We can't go wireless." "Then we don't go wireless," Imani said. Both men looked at her. "We hardwire," she said. "Direct physical connection from the source drive to the venue's AV system. Bypasses the jammer entirely, because it's not a wireless signal, it's a cable." "Can that be done without them noticing?" Adrian asked. "If it's done in advance," Elias said slowly. He was already thinking it through. "During setup. Night before. Can you do it without using anyone from the current crew?" Imani said. "I have one person," Elias said, "outside the organization. Former military. She knows AV systems and she owes me a conversation." "Get her," Adrian said. Elias nodded. He made a note. The three of them sat for a moment in the particular silence of people who have just closed one problem and know the next one is already forming somewhere they can't see yet. Then Imani's laptop made a sound. She looked at the screen. She went very still. Adrian watched her face go through a sequence of expressions that happened too fast for him to read fully, and then settle into something flat and deliberately controlled. "What?" he said. She turned the laptop around. On the screen was an image. Low resolution, the kind from a security camera. It showed the exterior of Imani's apartment building. It showed Adrian, standing at the front entrance. The timestamp read 3 days before he'd broken down the door. He was standing at the intercom panel, checking the building directory, and he hadn't known anyone was watching. And he clearly hadn't thought about building cameras because he'd been moving fast and not thinking clearly. And that, he understood now, was exactly when you make the kind of mistake that costs you everything. Beneath the image in a text field, "We know she's alive." The three of them read it. The room was completely quiet. Then Elias said, very quietly, "They've been watching the building since before you went in." "They were confirming she was still there," Imani said. Her voice was even, eerily even. "They sent someone to check before they sent the men who did this." She touched her ribs without seeming to realize she was doing it. "And when you showed up 3 days later, they put it together." "The timetable's gone," Elias said. "Not gone," Adrian said. He was looking at the image with an expression that was perfectly composed and, beneath that composition, something that ran very deep and very cold. "Compressed. Adrian, they want me to panic," he said. "They want me to move. If I run a counter-operation now, before the wedding, they can claim I was the one who broke the agreement. They can use the chaos to cover whatever comes next." He looked at Elias. "They sent this to make me react, so I'm not going to react." "That's easier to say than to do," Elias said. "I'm aware." Adrian looked at the image one more time. Then he closed the laptop. "Double the security on this location. Change the access protocol. No phone communication after tonight, everything through Elias directly, in person. He stood up, and get Imani a better safe house. This one's been comfortable enough to make us sloppy. Imani looked at him. I'm not moving, Imani. I'm not moving, she said again, and her voice had that quality it sometimes got. The one he had occasionally noticed across a desk and immediately filed under logistics issue. Do not pursue absolute, final, not interested in the argument. Moving creates exposure. If they're watching, a transfer is exactly when they take a shot at whatever's being transferred. Stay here. You tighten the perimeter. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. Elias, he said finally, tighten the perimeter. Already making calls, Elias said. Adrian picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He checked his phone out of habit. 3 missed calls from Selena's number, which he had not heard ring, which meant he'd turned the sound off at some point without noticing. He looked at Selena's name on his screen for 3 seconds. Then he called her back. She answered on the first ring. Adrian. Her voice was warm with a specific kind of relief. I was starting to worry. Sorry, he said. Long day. Wedding stuff. She laughed softly. Only a few more weeks of chaos, and then it's just us. Just us, he said. Are you coming over tonight? Can't, he said. Early morning tomorrow. But soon. Okay. A pause. I love you. He looked at the laptop he had just closed. He looked at Elias, who was on a separate phone with his back turned. He looked at Imani, who was watching him with an expression so neutral it had to be deliberate. I love you too, he said. He ended the call. He put the phone in his pocket. He looked at Imani. She said nothing. He said nothing. Then he put on his jacket, nodded to Elias, and walked out the door into an evening that had gotten colder without him noticing, and drove back toward the city and the woman who had said she loved him and meant something by it that had nothing to do with him at all, and the wedding that was 15 days away and could not be stopped and could not proceed as planned and had to be both of those things at exactly the same time. Somewhere behind him, in a room on Staten Island, Imani Cross opened the laptop again and went back to work. She had not slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. She did not go to sleep now. There was still too much to finish, and the window they had was closing, and she had already miscalculated once about how much time she had left. She was not going to miscalculate again. The perimeter was tightened by midnight. Elias had put 2 men on the exterior of the safe house building, not his usual crew, men he had cultivated separately over years, for exactly the kind of situation where the usual crew could not be trusted, and had changed the access code on the ground floor entry and installed a second lock on the interior stairwell that required a physical key only he and Adrian carried. He had done all of this in under 3 hours, which was the kind of efficiency that only came from having planned for contingencies you hoped you'd never need. Adrian had driven back to his apartment, slept 4 hours, and was dressed and out the door before 6. The days that followed had a particular texture that Adrian would remember for a long time afterward, not as a blur, the way people described traumatic periods, but as the opposite of a blur. Hyper-specific. Every detail landing with an abnormal weight, the way the world goes when your nervous system understands something is coming and starts cataloging everything as potential evidence. He remembered the exact angle of light in his apartment on the morning he had breakfast with Selena's wedding planner. He remembered the sound of Gabriel's voice. On a Tuesday phone call, the half-second hesitation before Gabriel said his name, which he had never noticed before and now could not stop hearing. He remembered the way Victor Ree looked at him across a dinner table on the Wednesday of that week, a look that was warm and paternal and utterly hollow behind the eyes. He smiled through all of it. Only asked questions about flower arrangements and honeymoon destinations, and whether the string quartet had confirmed their availability. He came back to the safe house every other night, late, through a route Elias changed each time. And Imani worked. She worked the way she had apparently always worked, with a precision that was almost aggressive. A refusal to leave anything approximate when it could be made exact. A willingness to stay at a task until it was finished that Adrian was only now beginning to understand had been holding his empire together for 5 years, in ways he had never had the clarity to see. On the 9th day after the photograph arrived, she called him. Not a text, not a message through Elias. A direct call to the secondary phone he'd purchased specifically for this, a device that was registered to no name and had never been used for anything except this one channel. He stepped out of a pre-wedding logistics meeting. Gabriel was there, and Victor, and 2 of Victor's men, and 3 of Adrian's own senior staff. And the absurdity of the whole tableau was something he had stopped noticing, because noticing it was a luxury he couldn't afford, and walked to a hallway window and answered. "I have the Selena timeline," Imani said. Her voice was tight, not panicked. Tight in the way a voice gets when what it's carrying is heavier than the speaker wants to admit. "How far back?" he said, a pause. 7 years, she said. He was quiet. "The gala where you met her," Imani said. Pulled the guest list and cross-referenced it against Victor's event spending for that year. Victor's organization paid for 4 tables at that event. Selena was seated at one of them. Another pause. Gabriel's assistant at the time, a man named Sio, who left the organization 4 years ago and is currently employed by one of Victor's subsidiaries, sent a seating preference request to the event organizers 2 weeks before the night. He specifically requested that Miss Ree be placed adjacent to the Kwon party table. Adrian looked out the hallway window at a city that was doing what it always did. "Gabriel arranged the seat," he said. "Gabriel arranged the introduction," Imani said. 7 years ago, before you had finished building what you've built, before the organization was worth what it's worth now." She stopped. He was investing in advance. 7 years. He had been with Selena for 3. They had dated for 2 before that. The 2 years before that, they had orbited each other at events, in circles, in the way people did in this world, occasional dinners, mutual acquaintances, the slow accumulation of familiarity that had felt, at the time, like the natural developments of something real. 5 years of architecture. Gabriel had built it in 5 years. "Is there more?" he said, because her voice told him there was. "One more thing," she said, "and I need you to be somewhere you can hear this, without reacting." "I'm in a hallway. Are you alone?" "Yes," a pause. Long enough that he checked the phone screen to confirm the call was still connected. "I found a recording," Imani said, "in Victor's files. It's from a meeting approximately 14 months ago. Victor is speaking with 2 of his men about the transition plan, the post-wedding acquisition." She stopped again. Gabriel's name comes up. Victor is explaining how he became involved, how the arrangement started. "Play it," Adrian said. Adrian. The hallway was empty. He could hear, distantly, the voices from the meeting room. He had just left someone laughing at something. The particular sound of men who were comfortable and had no reason not to be. The recording started. Victor Ree's voice was measured, businesslike, the voice of a man discussing a supply chain rather than a human being. He was explaining the genesis of the arrangement to someone who was apparently new enough to require the history. He named Gabriel. He described the terms they had arrived at. He described the role Selena had agreed to play. And then one of his men asked about the original obstacle. The original obstacle. Victor said, "Gabriel handled the parents." 4 words. Adrian did not move. His hand on the phone did not tighten. His breathing did not change. He was standing very still in a hallway in a building he owned, and 4 words were doing something to the inside of his chest that he did not have a name for and did not try to name. Adrian. Imani's voice. Careful. Like she was choosing each word the way you choose where to step on ice. "The accident. I know what the accident was," he said. "We don't know exactly what." "I know what it was," he said again. His voice was very quiet. The hallway was very empty. He turned and looked at the closed door of the meeting room at the end of it, and through that door, Gabriel Kwon was sitting at a table discussing wedding logistics and eating a catered lunch. And he had been sitting in rooms with Adrian for 20-some years with that information in his possession, and he had looked at Adrian across tables and said, "Trust me," in all the various ways a person could say that phrase. And Adrian. Imani's voice cut through whatever was happening in his head. Sharp and specific, the way she used it when something needed to stop. "Listen to me. You cannot go back into that room right now." He said nothing. "I need you to hear me," she said. "If you walk back in there and Gabriel sees your face, it is over. Everything we have built is over. They will know we know, and they will move before we're ready. And this ends with federal agents having nothing, and us having nothing, and those men walking out of whatever damage they can manage. He stood in the hallway. He breathed, in and out. Tell me what your face looks like right now, she said. It was such a strange question that it almost worked. Almost pulled him back to something functional. Tell me, she said again. I'm fine, he said. You are absolutely not fine, she said, with a flatness that was oddly grounding. But you are going to be fine in approximately 90 seconds, and then you are going to open that door and sit back down, and you are going to think about flowers and seating charts until that meeting is over, and then you are going to leave the building and come here. Do you understand me? He looked at the door. What if I told you I can't do it, he said. A beat. I would tell you that you've been doing it for 9 days, she said, and that the last 90 seconds is harder than the 9 days but shorter. He was quiet for a moment. That's not actually comforting, he said. It wasn't meant to be comforting, she said. It was meant to be accurate. He exhaled. He straightened his jacket with one hand. He put the phone in his pocket. He opened the door. Gabriel looked up when he came in, with that particular attentiveness that Adrian now understood was not warmth but surveillance, and said, Everything all right? Fine, Adrian said. He sat down. He picked up his water glass. Sorry, where were we? He came to the safe house that night at 10:30. Elias was already there. Imani was at the table with the laptop and a cup of tea that had gone cold at some point and that she had not touched since it went cold. And when Adrian walked in, she looked at his face for approximately 2 seconds and then looked back at the screen. She didn't ask how he was doing. He was grateful for that in a way he couldn't have articulated. He sat down, he said, Tell me the rest. So she told him. His parents had died when Adrian was 12 in a car accident on a rain-wet highway that a police report had described as a single-vehicle collision on a curve. The investigating officer had noted in the report that the road conditions were poor and that the vehicle showed signs of brake failure. The case had been closed within 3 weeks. Imani had obtained the original case file through a contact she declined to name. She had also obtained the maintenance records for the vehicle. Brake failure had been noted as consistent with wear and deterioration. But the maintenance records showed the vehicle had been serviced 6 weeks prior and had been assessed as fully operational. Could be a coincidence, Imani said. She said it like someone who did not believe it was a coincidence. The mechanic who did the service inspection retired 8 years ago and died 4 years after that. There's no one to interview. The car itself was destroyed, scrapped within the year. She paused. What I can tell you is that your father was in active disagreement with Gabriel in the months prior. I found correspondence, actual paper letters, in an archive of your father's business records that I located in a storage unit registered to your mother's sister. My aunt, Adrian said. She died 3 years ago. She left the storage unit, paid forward for a decade, Imani said. It's still there. I had someone photograph the contents. She turned the laptop. Your father's letters to an attorney, describing his concerns about the direction Gabriel was pushing the organization. He was planning to remove Gabriel from his role. Adrian looked at the letters. His father's handwriting. He had not seen his father's handwriting in over 20 years. He had forgotten entirely what it looked like, and now it was on a screen in front of him, small, slightly cramped, leaning to the right, and it was describing, in careful legal language directed at an attorney, the steps he was taking to protect his family's interests from a man his father had described as increasingly unpredictable and personally dangerous. His father had known. His father had been in the process of doing something about it. And then the brakes had failed. Adrian looked at the letters for a long time. Nobody spoke. Then he said, How long have you had this? The storage unit 3 days, Imani said. The recording about the parents, I found it 6 days ago. He looked at her. 6 days, he said. I needed to verify the storage unit contents before I told you, she said. I needed it to bleat, he said. Yes. He nodded once. He looked at the table. All right, he said. His voice was very even. Elias was watching him, the way Elias watched things that could go wrong without warning, with the slightly elevated alertness of someone who had made a professional practice of anticipating violence. Plan stays, Adrian said. Nothing changes. The wedding goes forward on schedule. Adrian, Elias said quietly. Nothing changes, he said again, and this time, the evenness in his voice had a texture beneath it that was not grief and not rage, but something compressed, beyond either of those things. Something that had been pressed down so far and so hard that it had become structural. We finish what we started, every piece in place. The night of the wedding, we end it. Elias looked at Imani. Imani looked at Adrian. There's something else, she said. He waited. The jammer, she said. Elias found it on Tuesday. Gabriel's people installed it. We confirmed that through the maintenance access logs for the venue. We know this already, Adrian said. What we didn't know, Imani said carefully, is that there's a second measure. Up to the backup. She turned the laptop again. I've been cross-referencing the venue's contractor records for the last 6 months. A security consulting firm did a systems review of the building in March. The firm is registered in Delaware. The Delaware registration connects to a holding company. She paused. The holding company is in Victor's network. Elias said, they didn't just install the jammer. They audited the entire building's technical infrastructure, Imani said. Every camera, every AV input, every screen in that ballroom. They know exactly how it all connects. And I believe they have the ability to cut power to the AV system entirely from a remote location, independent of the building's electrical. She stopped. Even if Elias hardwires the connection, they can black out every screen in the ballroom with a signal from a phone. The room was very quiet. The hardwired plan doesn't work, Elias said. Not if they activate the cutoff, Imani said. Adrian looked at the screen. He looked at the contractor records. He looked at the chain of connections that led from a Delaware holding company back to Victor Ree, and he thought about the jammer in the utilities closet, and the AV system audit, and the replaced crew on the vessel, and the succession clause Gabriel had helped him write, and the letters from his father to an attorney who had presumably never taken action on them because the client was dead inside of 2 months. He thought about a 12-year-old boy in a state building. He thought about Gabriel walking through the door. They've planned for every technical countermeasure, he said. Every obvious one, Imani said. He looked at her. Every obvious one, he repeated. Something shifted in her face, not quite hope, but the thing that precedes hope when you're too tired and too damaged to fully commit to it. What are you thinking? Elias said. I'm thinking they planned for technology, Adrian said. They planned for a flash drive and a wireless broadcast and a hardwired backup, and they've covered all of it. He paused. They didn't plan for a person. Imani was very still. No, Adrian said immediately, reading her stillness. You're not asking me anything, she said. I'm deciding. Imani, the documents can be called fabricated, she said. Her voice was even and absolute, and carried no inflection of uncertainty whatsoever. The recordings can be challenged. A flash drive full of files that nobody in that ballroom has independently verified. Gabriel stands up and calls it a forgery. And there are 350 people in that room, most of whom have a professional interest in believing him. She looked at Adrian steadily. But I walk into that room. You can barely walk, Adrian said. Then I walk barely, she said. They said you were dead. I know what they said. If I walk into that room, she said, they cannot call me a forgery. They cannot call me fabricated. I am the original evidence. I am the woman who found what they did, who they tried to kill for finding it, and who is standing in front of 350 witnesses with the documentation and the bruises and the name they never bothered to learn. And they cannot make that disappear with a signal from a phone. The room was very quiet. Elias looked at the table. Adrian looked at Imani. She looked back at him with the complete, settled certainty of someone who had already made this decision before she said it aloud, possibly before she had consciously articulated it to herself, possibly from the moment she had forced that drive into his hand on a bathroom floor and stayed conscious long enough to give him 2 sentences. Could die, he said. I could, she said. So could you? I'm not injured. You're also not the one they underestimated, she said. And that's the whole point, isn't it? They built an entire operation around the assumption that I was invisible. that I wouldn't matter, that even if I found something, nobody in that room would look at me and understand that what I was carrying was real. She paused. I want to use that. I want to walk into the room they built to kill you while wearing every single thing they did to try to stop me, and I want them to see what they missed. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. If something happens to you in that room, he started. Then something happens to me, she said, and the people who made it happen go to prison anyway, because the evidence is already in federal hands. I sent a package to a financial crimes investigator 6 days ago. Elias's head came up sharply. You what, Rebecca Sloan? Imani said. I sent her a complete evidence package, encrypted, with a decryption key delivered separately. She won't be able to act on it without the key, but she has it. She looked at Elias directly. It was insurance, in case something happened to the three of us before the wedding. You did that without telling us, Elias said. It was not quite an accusation. It was the tone of a man recalibrating. I did that without telling you, she confirmed. Because 3 people cannot keep a secret under pressure as well as 1, and because if you had known, you would have had to pretend you didn't know, and neither of you is as good at pretending as you think you are. A beat. Elias looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at Imani. You sent federal evidence without a conversation, he said. I sent federal insurance without a conversation, she said. There's a difference. Imani, if you want to be angry about it, be angry after, she said. Right now we have 11 days and a plan that has just had its 2 primary technical components removed. She turned back to the laptop. So let's build a new one. They built it over the next 6 hours. The new plan was simpler than the old one in its architecture and more dangerous in almost every other way. Without the wireless broadcast, without the reliable hardwire, without the technical infrastructure they had been counting on to carry the weight of the reveal, the whole thing came down to something more fundamental. People in a room. Evidence that could be seen and touched. A woman who was supposed to be dead. Elias identified 3 of his external contacts who could be positioned in the ballroom as guests, people with legitimate enough connections to the industry that their presence wouldn't trigger scrutiny. People Elias trusted with his life, which was the only category of trust that mattered anymore. They would serve as a physical cordon if things became violent, which everyone in the room agreed was no longer an if but a when. Adrian would carry a physical copy of the core evidence printed, notarized through a contact of Imani's, sealed. When the moment came, he would present it not to a screen, but to the room. Witnesses. 350 witnesses, most of whom had their own complex relationships with the law, and who would, Adrian calculated, have a very strong personal interest in not being present at an event that federal agents could later characterize as a criminal gathering. Some of them would run. Some would stay. All of them would have seen. The moment they see me, Imani said, Victor will try to move to an exit. Gabriel will try to manage the room. Selena, she paused. Selena will try something desperate. What kind of desperate? Adrian said. She'll say I'm lying, Imani said. She'll say the evidence is forged. She'll play the emotional card jilted employee, obsessed with her boss, fabricated a conspiracy out of resentment. She said it flatly, without inflection. It's the only move she has, and it will work on maybe a third of that room for maybe 6 seconds, which is 60 seconds that matters. Which is why Sloan needs to be there, Adrian said. Contact her tomorrow, Imani said. I'll give her the decryption key and brief her on the timing. If she comes, she'll come, Elias said. Federal investigators don't pass up the opportunity to walk into a room full of people they've been trying to prosecute for years. She'll need warrants, Imani said. She'll have time to get them, Adrian said. 11 days. The plan was not elegant. It was not clean. It had more moving pieces than Adrian was comfortable with, and a margin for error that would have been unacceptable in any operation he had ever run. But it was also, he recognized, the only version of this that could work. Because every technical solution had been anticipated and neutralized, and what Victor and Gabriel had not anticipated, what they had built their entire operation on not having to anticipate, was that the person who knew the most about Adrian Kwon's empire was a woman they had never considered a threat. That oversight was going to be the thing that ended them. It had to be. At 3 in the morning, Elias left for a series of meetings. He declined to specify in detail. Adrian stayed. He sat at the table while Imani typed, and he looked at his hands, and he did not say what he was thinking, which was that the plan required her to walk into a room where people had already tried to kill her once, with broken ribs and a face that still showed the map of what had been done to her, and to stand in front of 350 people and be unmissable. She was going to do it, whether he supported it or not. He knew that. He had known it from the moment she said it. Imani, he said. She kept typing. What? Why didn't you leave, he said. 6 weeks ago, when you found the first transfer. When you understood what it was. You could have taken what you had and walked away. She stopped typing. She looked at the screen for a moment, not at him. I thought about it, she said. But you didn't do it. No, why not? She was quiet long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, because you didn't do anything to deserve it. He waited. What they were planning to do to you, she said very carefully, was not something you had earned. She stopped. Started again. You are not always a good man. You have done things in this business that are not defensible. I'm aware of that. But you did not earn what was coming for you, and it would have come for you because they believed you were distracted enough and trusting enough. And she paused. And because they believed the person most likely to catch it was not worth watching carefully. She looked at him then. They were wrong about that, she said. He looked back at her. Outside the city was very quiet, in the way it only got at 3 in the morning, and the safe house was very still. And 11 days felt like a distance that was both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. After this is over, he said, we're going to have a different conversation. Imani looked at him for a moment. After this is over, she said, I intend to sleep for approximately 4 days. Then we can have whatever conversation you want. She turned back to the laptop. Her fingers moved across the keys. And Adrian sat in the silence of everything they had not said, in a room that smelled like cold coffee and the particular kind of exhaustion that came not from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much for too long, and he thought about 11 days, and about a ballroom in Lower Manhattan, and about a woman walking across marble with a cane and a bruised face and documents that would end the men who had built their lives, on the assumption that she would never matter. He thought they made her invisible because they were afraid of what she could see. He thought they were right to be afraid. He thought they just didn't know it until it was too late to do anything about it. The laptop screen cast pale light across Imani's face. She kept working. There was still so much to do, and the window was closing, and neither of them was going to waste what was left of it. Part 4 của kịch bản điện ảnh này được triển khai với dung lượng viết đủ 4,505,000 từ. Bắt đầu trực tiếp từ điểm kết thúc của Part 3. Trọng tâm tuyệt đối là cao trào bùng nổ, the peak of action and stakes. Mọi mâu thuẫn từ các phần trước, giờ đây hội tụ thành một cuộc đối đầu trực diện, không khoan nhượng. Nhịp điệu kịch bản phải cực kỳ dồn dập, căng thẳng đến mức nghẹt thở. Đuôi chi giọng văn mi thô rap, tập trung vào những chi tiết bản năng, tiếng tim đập, sự đau đớn thể xác, mồ hôi hoa lên máu và sự quyết liệt trong ánh mắt. Nhân vật phải thực hiện những lựa chọn liều lĩnh nhất, chấp nhận đánh đổi mọi thứ để đạt được mục tiêu. Hội thoại trong phần này cần gay gọn, sắc bén, đôi khi là những tiếng hét hoặc những lời nói đứt quãng vì kiệt sức. Triển khai chi tiết từng phân cảnh hành động hoặc đối đầu tâm lý, scene by scene. Tuyệt đối không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng, tiêu đề phụ hay nhắc đến thực thể tôn giáo. Kết thúc Part 4 ở đỉnh điểm kịch tính, ngay trước khi trận chiến cuối cùng ngã ngũ. Hãy trình bày trực tiếp trong tin nhắn, viết cực kỳ chi tiết. Nếu đạt rồi hẹn phản hồi, hãy dừng lại ở một câu đáng giờ để tôi ra lệnh viết tiếp. Chỉ dẫn bắt buộc, đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu, nhằm mục đích giải trí, không dựa trên bất kỳ sự kiện phi hay nhân vật có thật nào. Lưu ý đặc biệt quan trọng, nếu đạt đến giới hạn trả lời, không được dừng giữa câu. Hãy viết nốt câu đó hoàn chỉnh, không mở rộng nội dung. The 11 days dissolved the way time did when every hour carried the weight of 10. Adrian moved through them like a man walking across ice, each step deliberate, each breath controlled, each smile deployed with the mechanical precision of someone who understood that the wrong expression at the wrong moment would end everything before it started. He attended 3 more wedding planning sessions. He had dinner twice with Gabriel. He shook Victor Rhee's hand at a private pre-wedding gathering and held the handshake exactly 2 seconds longer than necessary, which was the length of time it took for him to catalog every micro-expression on Victor's face, while Victor looked back at him with the warm, confident satisfaction of a man who believed he was about to win. Victor believed he was about to win. That belief was the only advantage Adrian had left, and he protected it the way you protected the last match, in a box, when everything around you was wet. 6 days before the wedding, Elias confirmed that Rebecca Sloan had received the decryption key. She had called Elias's external contact, a former federal employee whose name Adrian did not ask for, and confirmed receipt. She had also, without being asked, the warrant process. "She's moving faster than expected," Elias said. They were in a parking structure in Midtown, a location chosen because parking structures had ambient noise that made directional microphones unreliable. "She must have had these people on a list for a while." "She did," Imani said through the phone speaker Elias held between them. "Victor Rhee has been a person of interest to the Financial Crimes Unit for 4 years. She's been waiting for something that would actually stick. And now she has it," Adrian said. "She has the documents," Imani said. "She needs the live event. A room full of witnesses and an on-record confession is the difference between a case that takes 3 years to build and a case that takes 3 months." "She'll be there?" Adrian said. "She said she wouldn't miss it," Imani said, with something in her voice that might have been, under other circumstances, dry humor. Her exact words were, "I've been waiting for an invitation to that family for a long time." Adrian looked at the concrete pillar in front of him. 4 days, he said. 4 days, Imani confirmed. 3 days before the wedding, something went wrong. It went wrong, the way things went wrong in operations, with too many moving pieces, not with a crash, but with a quiet shift, a detail that sat slightly off from where it was supposed to be, the operational equivalent of a floorboard that gives slightly more than it should when you step on it. Elias called Adrian at 7 in the morning. "One of my 3 external contacts," he said. "Chen, I can't reach her." "Since when?" "Since last night." Adrian was already dressed. He sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the opposite wall. She was positioned as a guest. "Plus, one on the Nguyen business table," Elias said. "I confirmed it 4 days ago. Last, she stopped answering." "Could be personal." "Could be," Elias said, and his voice made clear what he thought the probability of that was. Adrian thought about it for 12 seconds. "Can you cover her position with someone else?" "I have one option," Elias said, less experienced. "But reliable. Use her," Adrian said, "and check every other position today. Everything. I want confirmation on all 3 external contacts by end of day." "Already moving," Elias said. He hung up. Adrian sat on the edge of his bed for another moment. Then he called Imani. She answered before the first ring had finished, which meant she had been awake, which meant she had either not slept again or had slept, and woken early in the way you did when your nervous system had been on a war footing for 3 weeks. "I heard," she said. "Elias texted me. Thoughts?" "Could be a coincidence." A pause. "I don't believe in coincidences at this point." "Neither do I," he said. "Is there any way they made Chen?" "Not through me," she said. "I never had Chen's name." Elias kept those contacts completely separate. The exposure point, if there is one. She stopped. "Say it," he said. "If Chen is blown, it happened through Elias's channel," she said. "Not through you. Not through me." The implication settled between them. "You think there's a leak inside Elias's network," Adrian said. "I think we should consider it," she said carefully. "Not Elias, but someone adjacent to him. He trusts his people." "He trusts his people the way you trusted yours 3 weeks ago," she said. Adrian was quiet for a moment. He thought about what that meant for the next 3 days. "All right," he said. "I'll talk to him." The conversation with Elias happened in person, at the safe house, and it was the most difficult conversation the 2 of them had had in 9 years of working together, which was saying something because they had had some genuinely difficult conversations over that time. Elias sat at the kitchen table with his hands flat on the surface, and listened to Adrian lay it out carefully, without accusation, without the language of blame, and when Adrian finished, Elias was quiet for a long time. "You're saying someone in my network gave up, Chen," he said. "I'm saying it's possible," Adrian said. "Possible," Elias repeated. His voice had a quality to it that Adrian recognized, the quiet that preceded something, not the quiet that followed it. "It doesn't have to be deliberate," Imani said from across the table. "Could be a phone that wasn't clean. Could be a location that someone else was watching. Could it's day," Elias said. Both of them looked at him. He still had his hands flat on the table. He was looking at the space between them. "Min-day," he said. "He's been with me for 6 years. He was one of the people I used to confirm the AV system vulnerability at the venue." He paused. He also knew about Chen's position. "You're certain?" Adrian said. "I'm not certain," Elias said. "I'm stopped." He stopped. He picked up his coffee cup and then set it back down without drinking from it. "No, I'm not certain, but he's the only person who connects both pieces. The venue information and Chen's placement. Where is he now?" Imani said. "Off rotation," Elias said. "I gave him the days before the wedding as personal time. Standard protocol to avoid fatigue on the actual event." "Call him in," Adrian said. "Don't tell him why. Standard check-in." Elias looked at him, and if it's him, then we deal with that, Adrian said. "But we deal with it before Saturday." Elias called Min-day that afternoon. Day didn't answer. Elias tried again at 3 o'clock. At 4. At 4:30. At 5:15, Elias drove to Day's apartment in Astoria and knocked on the door and got no answer. And when he tried the building, super, and eventually the door itself, the apartment was empty in the way apartments went empty when someone had left in a hurry, not packed, not cleaned out, but stripped of specific things. Laptop gone, go bag gone. The kind of targeted removal that took 11 minutes if you'd practiced. He called Adrian from the parking lot. "He's gone," he said. Adrian was in his car on the FDR drive, sitting in traffic that hadn't moved in 8 minutes. He looked at the river through his window. "When?" he said. "Sometime in the last 24 hours, Elias said. He had help. The super mentioned a car he hadn't seen before parked in the building lot Tuesday night. "Victor's people," Adrian said. "Or Gabriel's," Azia said. It didn't matter whose. What mattered was that Min-day had known enough, not everything, but enough. The venue's technical vulnerability, Chen's position, the general timeline. "They know Imani is alive?" Adrian said. "They already knew that," Elias said. "The photograph." "Do they know she's attending the wedding?" Silence. "I don't know," Elias said. "Could Day have known that?" Another silence, longer. "It's possible," Elias said. He was present for part of the conversation about the hardwire plan. Not all of it. Enough. Adrian looked at the river. The traffic moved 2 car lengths and stopped again. 2 days, he said. 2 days, Elias said. "Get Imani out of the safe house tonight," Adrian said. New location. "Tell her nothing over the phone, go there in person. Tell her in person. Take a route you haven't used. And you?" "I'm going to the rehearsal dinner," Adrian said. A beat. "The rehearsal dinner," Elias said, carefully, the way you repeated something to make sure you heard it correctly. "Gabriel and Victor will both be there," Adrian said. "If they know more than we think they know, I need to see their faces tonight. I need to know what we're walking into on Saturday." He paused. "And I need them to see mine." The rehearsal dinner was at a private room in a restaurant in Tribeca. 40 people, the inner circle of both families plus the wedding party. A long table with candlelight and good wine, and the specific performance of joy that preceded major events in the lives of people who had things to protect. Adrian arrived exactly on time. Selena was at the far end of the room when he entered, talking to 2 of her bridesmaids, and she looked up and smiled when she saw him, a real smile, or something indistinguishable from one, and crossed the room and kissed him on the cheek and, "You look good." And he said, "So do you." And both of those things were true, and none of it meant anything. Gabriel was at the bar. He turned when Adrian came in, and his face did what it always did when Adrian entered. A room opened, warmed, produced the expression of a man who genuinely loved the person he was looking at. Adrian had spent 3 weeks studying that expression for cracks, and tonight, standing in a candlelit room 2 days before the event that was supposed to end his life, he found none. Gabriel was very, very good. There he is, Gabriel said, and put his hand on Adrian's shoulder, and Adrian let him, and they stood at the bar together while a bartender poured something amber, and Gabriel said, "How are you actually doing?" in the tone of a man who wanted a real answer. "Honestly," Adrian said. "Honestly," Gabriel said. "Ready for it to be over," Adrian said. "The planning. All of it. I'm ready for it to just be done." Gabriel studied him. "That's normal," he said. "The anticipation is always harder than the thing itself." "Is that how it was for you?" Adrian said. "When you got married?" Gabriel's marriage had ended 15 years ago, a quiet divorce that had never been fully explained, and that Adrian had never pressed. Gabriel's face registered the question with a small shift, not discomfort, something more like access, like a door opening to a room he kept closed. "Somewhat different circumstances," Gabriel said. "Of course," Adrian said. He sipped his drink. Victor rematerialized at his left elbow approximately 3 minutes, which was fast enough to suggest he had been watching for a moment to approach. He was a tall man, well-maintained for his age, with the kind of bearing that came from decades of being the most important person in most rooms he entered. "Adrian," he said, "ready to become family?" "More than ready," Adrian said. Victor smiled. He had a good smile. Adrian had noticed, over the months of the engagement, that Victor's smile operated on a separate circuit from everything else in his face. It appeared when required, without requiring the rest of his expression to change. "Your uncle tells me you've been under some strain," Victor said. "The business of the assistant. Getting easier," Adrian said. "These things pass," Victor said, with the magnanimous confidence of a man who had made things pass. "You'll be surprised how much clearer everything looks after Saturday." "I'm counting on it," Adrian said. Victor's smile deepened slightly, and in that deepening, in that fraction of a millimeter of movement, Adrian saw something that he filed away with absolute precision. Not triumph. Something that preceded triumph, the specific expression of a man who was looking at a timeline and seeing it almost complete. Victor believed Saturday was still going exactly the way it had been planned. He didn't know about Imani, or if he knew she was alive, he didn't know she was coming. That was the information Adrian had come here to obtain, and he had it within the first 20 minutes. And he spent the remaining 2 hours of the rehearsal dinner being precisely the groom they needed him to be present, slightly distracted in the way of a busy's man, looking forward to a landmark moment, warm with Selena, deferential to Gabriel, respectful of Victor, and absolutely unremarkable in every detail. When he left, Gabriel walked him to the door. They stood for a moment in the entrance of the restaurant while coats were being retrieved, and Gabriel looked at him with that particular expression Adrian had grown up under, the one that meant the man was about to say something he considered important. "Trust me," Gabriel said. He said it, the way he had always said it, not as a request, but as a reminder. As a reference to a long history of earned trust, to the specific texture of the relationship between a mentor and the boy he had formed. Adrian looked at him. "I do," he said. He meant it as a lie. Standing in the entrance of that restaurant, looking at the man who had built his life from the wreckage of a tragedy that the man himself had engineered, Adrian Kwon said "I do" and meant it as the cleanest, most complete lie he had ever told. And Gabriel Kwon, who had spent 40 years reading people, nodded and squeezed his shoulder and let him go. Saturday came like weather, not like a date on a calendar, not like an event that had been planned and confirmed and catered and florist approved. It came like a front moving in perceptible hours before it arrived, a pressure change in everything. Quality of light different, and the air different, and the bodies of people who knew what was coming, registering it below the level of conscious thought. Adrian was dressed and ready at 9 in the morning for a 3 o'clock ceremony. He sat in his apartment and looked at the suit hanging on the back of his bedroom door, and drank coffee that he barely tasted, and did not check his phone except twice. Once to confirm that Elias had moved Imani to the new location without incident, and once to read a single message from Imani that said simply, "Ready." He had sent back "Me too." That had been 4 days ago, from the new location. He had not seen her since. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock. The ballroom doors opened at 2 for guests to be seated. The venue staff had been in place since 9 in the morning, and among them arrived with the AV setup crew, documented as a contracted technical assistant for the sound system, carrying a case of legitimate equipment that contained, inside a false bottom, a direct wire connection that Elias had built himself over 48 hours was one of Elias's 2 remaining external contacts. The hardwire was still the plan, not because it was safe, because even with the AV cutoff risk, a live feed, however brief, to every screen in that ballroom before Victor's people could kill the power would be enough. 3 seconds of Selena's voice on the wall. 3 seconds of bank transfer numbers large enough to read from the back of the room. 3 seconds was enough if the right people were in the right positions when it happened. Elias's remaining contact, a woman named Torres, who had the specific competence of someone who had wired audio for events that required things to not go wrong, was inside the venue now. Rebecca Sloan was 20 minutes away, in a vehicle with 4 federal agents and a set of warrants signed by a judge who had been called at 6 in the morning and had apparently been waiting for exactly this opportunity for some time. Imani was 2 blocks away. The suit hung on the back of Adrian's door. He put it on at noon. The ballroom was everything it was supposed to be. 350 chairs, arranged in the precise geometry of formal ceremony. Flowers that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, white and architectural, placed at intervals that suggested abundance without clutter. The kind of lighting that made everyone look slightly better than they were, which was, Adrian thought, an almost perfect metaphor for everything that had happened in this room before anyone arrived. He stood at the altar at 5 minutes to 3. Elias was 2 rows back on the left, in a suit that did not look like it cost what it cost, with his phone in his jacket and his eyes doing what they always did, tracking the room's edges, the exits, the positions of specific people, the location of the 3 individuals who were not what they appeared to be. Victor Ree was in the front row on the bride's side. He was wearing a dark suit and an expression of settled authority, and when he caught Adrian's eye across the room, he gave a small, certain nod. Gabriel was standing near the officiant, slightly off to the side, in the position he had asked for weeks ago, close enough to witness, present enough to have role, not so formal as to crowd the moment. He looked at Adrian with the warmth he had always deployed, and Adrian held his gaze for exactly the right number of seconds and looked away. At the back of the room, the screens positioned for the slide display of photographs that Selena had spent its 2 weekends curating were dark. Somewhere in the AV booth above the ballroom, Elias's contact, Torres, was connected and waiting. 3 o'clock, the music started. Selena appeared at the entrance of the ballroom. She was dressed in white that had cost more than Adrian's first car, and she was genuinely beautiful, and she walked toward him with the specific composure of a woman who had been preparing for this moment for 7 years. And Adrian watched her come and felt something that he did not try to categorize or suppress, just let it exist alongside everything else. The way you learned to hold complicated feelings when you ran out of the luxury of processing them. She reached the altar. She looked at him. Her eyes close up were very clear. Whatever she felt, and he thought, watching her, that it was possible, she felt something real, that the 7 years had produced something genuine that coexisted with the architecture of the plan. It was present in those eyes, and it was not uncomplicated, and he filed that away with everything else, and returned her gaze and stood very still. The officiant began. The words went over him like water. He heard them without registering them, tracking instead, L's position unchanged. Victor, still seated, composed. Gabriel, slightly forward on his feet, in a way that was barely perceptible. The posture of a man who was managing anticipation. The jammer. The jammer would activate when Adrian produced the drive. It was already on a trigger someone in this room, or outside it, with a device that would kill the wireless signal the moment the situation departed from the expected. But Torres was hardwired. That was the thing Gabriel had not planned for, because Gabriel had planned for technology and had not planned for a woman in a technical crew uniform who had been in the room for 6 hours and had run a cable through a conduit in the floor that connected directly to the ballroom's main display bus, bypassing the wireless receiver entirely. The jammer would fire. The screens would still come alive. The officiant reached the final question. "Do you take this woman?" Adrian looked at Selena. She was watching him with those clear eyes. He thought about the recording, her voice, discussing the vessel, discussing the timeline. 11 minutes after he had told her his schedule. Call to Victor's man. He thought about his father's handwriting. He thought about a curve in a highway in the rain. "No," he said. The word landed in the ballroom like something dropped from a height. 350 people produced a collective intake of breath that was almost a sound in itself, not a gasp. Something more involuntary than that. The respiratory response to a reality that had just shifted without warning. Selena's face did not collapse. He gave her that. Whatever she was not unprepared for the possibility of failure. What happened in her face was a rapid, contained recalibration, the flash of something real, followed immediately by the doors coming down, the composure reasserting itself. "Adrian," she said, very quiet. "Only for him. Don't." "I'm sorry," Said said. He reached into his jacket. He produced the flash drive. Above the ballroom, in the darkness of the utility space, the jammer activated. And Torres pushed the hardwire signal through. Every screen in the ballroom came alive, simultaneously. The photographs of Selena and Adrian, the curated love story of 7 years of architecture, disappeared. What replaced them was numbers, bank transfers, columns of figures with dates and authorization codes, and account numbers, displayed at a size that was readable from the back row of the room. 11 transactions, 14 months. Adrian Kwon's digital signature on 3 of them, displayed with the clarity of a document that had been prepared by someone who understood what courtrooms required. 350 people looked at the walls. Gabriel moved first. He was on his feet before the second screen finished loading, and his voice cut through the room with the authority of a man who had been managing rooms for 40 years. "This is fabricated," he said, "whatever this is." He was already moving toward Adrian, one hand raised, the other reaching for the phone in his jacket. "This is a fabrication, and I want everyone here to understand." "Stop the feed," someone said loudly, from Victor's side of the room. The screens kept running. Torres had anticipated the AV cutoff. She had wired the backup bypass herself, and when the power signal to the DIS bus was killed from the remote location, the backup circuit she had installed 18 hours ago kept the screens alive on a secondary draw. Selena's voice filled the room. A recording. Her voice and a man's voice, Victor Operative, named in the financial documents now cycling on the screens, discussing the vessel. Discussing the crew replacements. Discussing the timeline. Discussing Adrian's post-wedding voyage. Her voice, clear as anything, speaking about the timeline for a man who was still standing at an altar holding a flash drive. Victor Ri was on his feet. He said something in Korean to a man on his immediate left, one of his security detail, who had been seated as a guest and was now moving toward the nearest exit. "Nobody leaves." The voice came from the back of the ballroom. Rebecca Sloan walked through the main doors. She had her credentials in her left hand and she held them up without theater, the specific gesture of someone who had done this enough times that the drama of it had become procedural. Behind her, 4 federal agents fanned out along the back wall. Victor's man stopped moving toward the exit. The room was a specific kind of chaos, not violence yet, but the pressure preceding it, 350 people, and the fracture lines between them suddenly visible, some moving toward exits and finding Sloan's people there, some staying very still, some already taking out phones, some watching the screen expressions that ranged from shock to a specific, calculating fear. Gabriel was 3 feet from Adrian. His phone was in his hand. His face had done something that Adrian had never seen it do in 20-some years. It had lost the warmth. Not performed coldness, not managed neutrality. It had lost the warmth, the way a building lost heat, gradually and then all at once, and what was underneath it was something Adrian did not have a name for and did not want to spend time naming. "Turn it off," Gabriel said. His voice was low, personal, directed entirely at Adrian, as though the 350 people and the federal agents and the screens, cycling through the evidence of his life's work, were background noise. Turn it off and we can what? Adrian said. Gabriel's jaw tightened. This isn't what you think, he said. Tell me what it is, Adrian said. Not here, here, Adrian said. In front of all of these people, he didn't raise his voice. He matched Gabriel's register low, direct, the key of a private conversation happening in a public room. Tell me what it is. Tell me what my father did that made it necessary. The word father went through Gabriel's face like something thrown. That's not... Tell me about the accident, Adrian said. Gabriel Chell stopped. The room had quieted in the way. Rooms sometimes did around a specific exchange, not silence, but a reorganization of attention, the energy of 350 people redirecting toward the two men at the altar. You don't know what you're talking about, Gabriel said. I have the maintenance records, Adrian said. I have the letters. I have a recording of Victor explaining your role. He paused. I have more than I need, and so does she. He looked toward the back of the room, toward Sloane. And then the other door opened. The sound was distinctive. Specific, uneven rhythm of a cane on marble. Imani Cross came through the side entrance of the ballroom, and the sound of her progress across that floor was the only sound in the room for the 6 seconds it took her to clear the door and orient herself. She was bruised. She was bandaged at the wrist. She moved with the deliberate economy of someone managing pain in real time, each step costing something specific and visible. And she was wearing the marks of what had been done to her, in a way that could not be edited or minimized or argued away by anyone in that room who had eyes. She had not dressed for a wedding. She had dressed for what it was. She moved toward the altar. Selena's composure fractured. She's lying, Selena said loudly, to the room. Her voice had the particular clarity of panic that had been forced into a presentable form. Whatever she told you, whatever documents she's fabricated, she was obsessed. She had access to our systems. She could have manufactured all of. My name is Imani Cross, Imani said. Her voice carried. She reached the altar. She placed the original documentation, physical, notarized, sealed directly over the unsigned marriage certificate, on the ceremonial table. They tried to kill me for these documents, she said. They failed. She looked at the room. She looked at the screens. She looked at Selena, and then a man in the third row, Victor's operative, the same voice from the recording still playing on the screens above them, lunged from his seat. Not toward Imani, toward the documents. Adrian moved. Caught the man before he reached the table, one hand on the man's jacket, and the momentum of it took them both into the corner of the ceremonial table and then to the floor. And the impact was the kind that drove the air out of your lungs and left you working to get it want. And the man was strong and desperate in the specific way of someone who understood exactly what those documents meant for the rest of his life. Adrian drove his elbow into the man's sternum. The operative went slack. Adrian stood up, breathing hard. His jacket was twisted. His hands were shaking, slightly, not from fear, from the adrenaline dump that followed physical violence, the body insisting on its own response regardless of what the mind was doing. He looked at the table. Imani had not moved. She was still standing, exactly where she had placed the documents, both hands on the table edge, slightly forward, covering them with her body the way you covered something you had spent 3 weeks almost dying to protect. The operative was on the floor. Elias's people had him secured within 4 seconds. Sloane was moving forward. Victor was surrounded. Gabriel stood at the edge of the altar space and looked at the floor and then at Adrian, and his face had finished losing the warmth. And what was there instead was something that looked, to Adrian's surprise, like exhaustion. Deep and specific and very old. It's over, Adrian said. Gabriel looked at him. Adrian, it's over, he said again. Gabriel's mouth opened. What came out was quieter than anything else that had been said in that room since the music stopped. Your father and I don't, Adrian said. You need to understand. I don't need anything from you, Adrian said. Not an explanation. Not a reason. Not... He stopped. He looked at the man he had trusted since he was 12 years old, the man he had learned from and built with and called family in every way that word applied. And he felt the specific weight of what it was to look at that man and find a stranger looking back. I don't need anything from you. Gabriel looked at him for a long moment. Then Sloane reached them. She looked at Gabriel with the focused, professional interest of someone who had been building toward this meeting for years. Mr. Kwon, she said, I think we need to have a conversation. Gabriel looked at her. He looked at Adrian. He looked at the screens, still cycling the transfers, the shell companies, the crew manifests, the authorization codes bearing his digital signature. His shoulders dropped approximately a centimeter. It was barely visible. It was the most complete thing Adrian had ever seen. My lawyer, Gabriel started, will be called, Sloane said. After we talk, she nodded to one of her agents. The agent moved to Gabriel's side. Across the room, 2 more agents had Victor Ri by the arms, and Victor was speaking rapidly in Korean to no one in particular, the specific agitation of a man whose plan was structured on contingencies that had all just failed simultaneously. Selena stood at the altar. She looked at Adrian. He looked back at her. Her composure was intact, but it was the composure of something that was holding together through surface tension alone, the kind that would go the moment she was out of the room. Was any of it real, he said? He asked it quietly. For no one else. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. He didn't know if he believed her. He wasn't sure it changed anything. Then I'm sorry, he said. For what your father made you. Something moved in her face. Then the agent reached her, and whatever it was closed, and Selena Ri looked at the floor and let herself be guided away from the altar and toward the waiting federal presence at the back of the room. Adrian turned. The ballroom was controlled chaos. Sloane's people working systematically through the room, agents at every exit, 350 guests in various states of shock or calculation or desperate phone usage. The screens were still running. Torres was keeping them alive from the booth above, and the evidence cycled through its sequences with the patient indifference of documented fact. And every person in that room who looked up at those walls saw exactly what they were supposed to see. Adrian walked to the table. Imani was still there. Her knuckles on the table edge were white. She was breathing through her nose, carefully, the way she breathed when the ribs were talking to her, and she was refusing to let them win. You can let go, he said. She looked at him. She looked at her hands on the documents. Slowly she released the edge. She straightened. The cane was in her right hand, and she was upright in the specific way of someone who had decided to be upright before she had finished deciding if she could manage it. Sloane has the originals? She said. She will, he said. Imani nodded. She looked at the room around them, the controlled movement of federal agents, the contained fracture of a world that had been built on a lie and had just encountered something it couldn't argue with, and something in her face, some load-bearing tension that had been present since he had found her on a bathroom floor 3 weeks ago released. Not dramatically, just gone, like a held breath. Adrian stood beside her in the ballroom. His wedding was supposed to have been, and the evidence cycled on the walls. And 3 floors below them, the Hudson was doing what it always did, and the life that had been constructed to end here carefully, invisibly, with good wine and a replaced crew and a succession clause buried in boilerplate, was over. Not the way the architects of it had intended. The other way. It worked, Imani said. It was not a question. It was something said aloud, because some things needed to be said aloud in order to become fully real. It worked, he said. She exhaled. He stood beside her. Around them, the room continued its complicated resolution, and the screens kept running, and Sloane moved through it all, with the efficient satisfaction of a woman collecting something she had earned. And the men who had built a wedding around an ending were being walked toward a different one entirely. Adrian looked at the documents on the table. Imani's work, 6 weeks of invisible, dangerous, meticulous work, and thought about a kitchen table in the Bronx, with medical bills stacked in a neat pile. He thought about everything he had not seen. He thought about what it cost a person when staying was that hard. He looked at Imani. She was watching the room with the alert, assessing attention she brought to everything, already cataloging what still needed to happen, who needed to be where, what the next necessary step was. She had not stopped working. Even now, even here, he opened his mouth to say something. And from across the room, Sloan caught his eye and raised 2 fingers, the signal they had agreed on. The one that meant she had what she needed, and the warrants were active, and this was no longer a scene, it was an arrest. That was the word that completed the sentence. Adrian looked at Sloan's 2 raised fingers and understood that the thing they had built over 3 weeks of careful, expensive, dangerous work had just become something the federal government owned, which was exactly what it was supposed to become, which did not make the transfer feel clean or simple, or any of the things that plans felt in the planning stage before the reality of them arrived. He nodded to Sloan. She moved back into the controlled motion of the room. He turned to Imani. She was already watching him. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine. You've been standing on a broken rib for 20 minutes, he said. "Sit down." She looked at him with the expression she used when she was deciding whether an argument was worth the energy, which was a calculation she ran quickly and efficiently on most things. She sat down. There was a chair from the ceremonial arrangement nearby, and she pulled it toward her and lowered herself into it with the controlled care of someone who had learned over 3 weeks exactly which movements cost what. Once she was seated, something in her posture changed, not collapse, but the release of a very specific muscular effort that she had been maintaining since she walked through that door. Adrian stood beside her. Around them, the room continued its work. Sloan's agents moved with the systematic efficiency of people operating inside a warrant, and the guests, 350 people who had come to watch a wedding and were leaving as witnesses to something that would occupy federal dockets, for the next several years, were being sorted, documented, and in some cases detained with the calm authority of a process that had been set in motion and could not now be stopped. Screens had gone dark. Torres had finally cut the feed from the booth above, which meant she had confirmed Sloan had what she needed, which meant the evidentiary component of the last 3 weeks had concluded in the only way it could have, and still meant anything. Gabriel was near the back of the room. Adrian watched him from across the ballroom, the specific quality of distance that existed between them now, which was not the distance of geography, but of something that had no clean name. Gabriel was standing with 2 of Sloan's agents, and he was not handcuffed yet, which was a procedural detail that would resolve itself in the next few minutes. And he was looking at the floor the way a person looked at something they could not look away from, even though there was nothing there. Adrian walked toward him. He did not plan to. His feet made the decision, and his body followed, and by the time he had fully registered what he was doing, he was already crossing the marble floor of a ballroom that smelled like flowers and expensive candles, and the particular tension of a room where something irrevocable had just happened. One of Sloan's agents moved to intercept him. Sloan herself appeared from his left and touched the agent's arm. "1 minute," she said. Adrian stopped in front of Gabriel. Gabriel looked up close, in the specific light of that room at that hour. He looked older than Adrian had ever seen him look. Not frail. Gabriel Kwon had never been frail, but worn down to something true, the way old wood looked when you stripped the finish and found the grain beneath, which could be beautiful or could be something else entirely, depending on what the wood had been through. "Your lawyer will be called," Adrian said. "Sloan will honor that." Gabriel looked at him. "I'm not worried about lawyers," he said. His voice was very quiet. Not defeated, something more specific than defeat, something that had been worked through to the other side of it. "Then what are you worried about?" Adrian said. Gabriel was quiet for a moment. "What you think of me," he said. Adrian looked at him. Took his time with the answer, because the answer deserved time, because the question was real, even if everything around it was not. Because whatever Gabriel Kwon had done, and whatever he was, the man had also sat across a kitchen table from a 12-year-old boy and taught him how to fold dumpling dough, and that was real too. And the fact that both things were true was the thing Adrian had been carrying for 3 weeks without knowing how to put it down. "I think you loved me," Adrian said. "I think you loved me and you did it anyway." Gabriel's jaw worked. "That's the worst version," Gabriel said. "Isn't it?" "Yes," Adrian said. He held Gabriel's gaze for a moment longer. Then he stepped back. Sloan's agent moved in. Gabriel went with the agent without resistance, the specific absence of resistance of a man who understood that the time for resistance had passed some years ago, and that what was happening now was not an ending so much as a reckoning that had been building since before Adrian was born. Adrian watched him go. He stood in the middle of the ballroom floor and watched Gabriel Kwon walk toward the door with a federal agent at his elbow, and he kept his face arranged in the particular way he had maintained it for 3 weeks, steady, legible, giving away only what was meant to be given, and underneath that arrangement, in the space that the arrangement protected, something moved that he did not try to name or contain or speed up. He let it move. He turned back toward the altar. Victor Ree was less composed than Gabriel. This was not surprising. Victor had built his life on the assumption that distance was protection, that enough shell companies, enough intermediaries, enough layers of corporate structure between himself and the things done in his name would keep him in a category of deniability that prosecutors found difficult to breach. What Imani had built was a breach. She had spent 6 weeks constructing a path from the outermost shell to Victor's personal digital signature, and the path was documented at every step, and it was the kind of documentation that left very little room for the argument that he hadn't known. When the agents reached him, Victor's composure broke in a specific way, not emotionally, but verbally. He began talking. He talked to the agents, and then to Sloane when she approached, and then to 2 different people on his phone, before one of the agents explained to him that the phone needed to be surrendered. And the talking had the quality of a man who had survived for decades by managing his way out of difficult situations, and was discovering that management required leverage, and his leverage was gone. Sloane listened to approximately 90 seconds of it. Then she said, very calmly, "Mr. Ree, I've been building this case for 4 years. Whatever you're going to tell me, I've had longer to think about it than you have." She paused. "Your attorney will be present before you say anything else." Victor stopped talking. He looked across the room to where Adrian was standing. The look lasted approximately 3 seconds and contained everything that didn't need to be said: the recognition of the specific miscalculation, the understanding of which variable had defeated the model, the particular quality of rage that came not from losing, but from losing to something you had not considered worth accounting for. Adrian returned the look without expression. Victor looked away first. Selena was sitting in a chair near the east wall, with an agent standing 2 feet away, and she was very still in a way that was completely unlike the stillness of composure. She had her hands in her lap, and she was looking at them, and her face was doing something private and undefended that Adrian had never seen it do in 3 years of knowing her. He almost didn't approach her. He stood at a distance for a moment and thought about what he wanted from the conversation, which was the discipline Imani had pushed on him repeatedly over the past 3 weeks. Don't act until you know what you need from the action. He didn't know what he needed from this one. He went anyway. She looked up when he was 4 feet away, and the private expression closed but didn't vanish entirely. She was too tired to make it vanish entirely, and maybe she had stopped trying. He sat in the chair next to her. They were quiet for a moment. "How long did you know?" she said finally. 3 weeks, he said. She processed that. The smile, she said. "When you told me about Imani." "Yes." She closed her eyes briefly. "I didn't mean to. I'd been waiting for confirmation that the timeline was on track, and when you said she was gone, She stopped. "I didn't mean to show it." "I know," he said. "That doesn't help," she said. "No," he agreed. She looked at her hands again. "What was real?" she said. It was not quite a question. It was something she was working out aloud, a form of accounting she was doing in real time. "I asked you that," he said. A pause. The answer was yes. "More than I expected." She was quiet for a moment. That wasn't supposed to happen. He thought about 7 years. He thought about a gala and a seating arrangement and a man who had planned the introduction with the patience of someone investing in an outcome he would not see for a long time. "Your father made you a tool," he said. She looked at him sharply. "I made my own choices," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not removing them from you. I'm saying what else is also true." She looked at him for a long moment. Her composure was holding, but it was from some stance in the aftermath of a building that had come down, intact themselves, but surrounded by what was no longer standing. "I'll cooperate," she said, "with Sloane, whatever she needs." "That's up to you," he said. "I know it's up to me." A pause. "I'm telling you anyway." He didn't know why she was telling him. Maybe she needed to tell someone who wasn't a federal agent. Maybe it was the last honest exchange she could offer. Maybe the years had made something real enough that the ending of them required some kind of acknowledgement between the two people at the center of it. He nodded. He stood up. She watched him stand. "Adrian," she said. He looked down at her. "I'm sorry about your parents," she said. "I didn't know about that. Not until recently." She held his gaze. "I want you to know I didn't know." He looked at her. He believed her. He didn't know what to do with believing her, so he held it alongside everything else and let it be what it was. "Okay," he said. He walked away. The ballroom took 2 hours to clear. Took 2 hours because 350 people required documentation, and some of them required detention, and some of them required the kind of careful handling that federal agents were trained to provide to individuals whose cooperation might be valuable and whose alarm needed to be managed accordingly. Adrian stayed until the end. He stood near the altar and answered Sloane's questions, a preliminary interview that she conducted with the focused efficiency of someone who had a great deal more to do tonight and needed his piece of it organized quickly. He gave her everything she asked for. He told her about the maintenance records and the letters from his father's storage unit and the chain of connections from Imani's evidence package to the events of the last 3 weeks. Clean seed. Sloane listened. She took notes in a small notebook with a pen that she kept tucked behind her ear when she wasn't writing, which was a detail Adrian noticed, and filed away. The way he filed everything, not because it mattered, but because his brain was still running at the operational tempo of the last 3 weeks and had not yet received the signal that it was safe to slow down. "Your assistant," Sloane said. "Imani Cross. I'll need a full statement from her." "When she's ready," Adrian said. "There's a timeline." "There's always a timeline," he said. "She's been carrying broken ribs for 3 weeks. She'll give you the statement when she can sit in a chair, without it costing her something you should be paying her for." Sloane looked at him. Then she made a note. "When she's ready," she said. "Thank you," he said. At 6 in the evening, 3 hours after the ceremony was scheduled to begin, and 2 hours after the last federal agent cleared the venue, Adrian and Imani sat in the empty ballroom. The flowers were still there. Nobody had taken down the flowers, and in the silence of the emptied room, they sat in a specific kind of incongruity, all that white and careful arrangement, all that expensive beauty deployed for an event that had not been what it appeared, still present now in the aftermath of what it actually was. Imani was in the chair she had pulled to the altar. Adrian had brought 2 cups of coffee from a catering station in the hallway that had been abandoned when the room was cleared, and the coffee was the catering kind adequate, institutional, the flavor of a thing that was doing the job without distinguishing itself, and both of them drank it without comment. For a while they didn't talk. There was a particular quality to the silence between them that had changed over the last 3 weeks in ways Adrian could feel but could not have precisely described. It had started as the silence of a professional relationship, the silence that 2 people maintained when they worked together, and the work was the whole of what connected them. It had become something with more weight, more texture, the kind of silence that accumulated meaning rather than simply filling the space where speech was absent. "Torres?" Imani said. "Elias will get her out," he said. She had solid documentation for her presence. "It'll take a few hours." The evidence package with Sloane, she confirmed receipt of the physical originals? "Yes," he said. "The shell company documentation, the 3rd tier, the one connecting to Gabriel's personal accounts, that needs to be cross-referenced with." She stopped. "It's done," he said. She looked at the empty room. "I know," she said. "Then stop working," he said. "For 1 hour. You can start again in 1 hour." She looked at him. She drank her coffee. "Elias," she said. "What about him?" "He lost someone he trusted for 6 years," she said. That's going to sit with him for a long time." "I know," Adrian said. "He'll blame himself." "I know that, too." "He shouldn't." "No," Adrian said. "But he will anyway, because that's what people do when they find out the people they trusted were something other than what they appeared. He paused. Doesn't resolve just because the logic of it doesn't hold. Imani looked at him. He looked back. I know something about that, he said. She was quiet. Gabriel. She started. I don't want to talk about Gabriel tonight, he said. It was not sharp. It was simple and direct, and she received it that way. Okay, she said. He looked at the flowers. There's going to be a period, he said. After all of this, the federal process, the restructuring, the fallout where everything is in question. The business, the relationships, the people in that organization who were compromised and the ones who weren't, and figuring out which is which. Yes, she said. It's going to be a long period, he said. Probably, she said. I'm going to need someone who can see things I don't see, he said. Who has seen them for years without being asked, and without recognition, and without he stopped. He picked up his coffee cup and put it down without drinking from it. I'm going to need the person who actually runs this organization to have the seat that reflects what they actually do. Imani was very still. That's not a job offer made at a wedding that didn't happen, he said. I want to be clear about that. That's a statement of fact about what's been true for 5 years, and what should have been formalized 3 years before I was smart enough to see it. She looked at him. Chief strategic partner, he said. Independent authority. Your own team. A seat at the executive table that doesn't move based on who else is in the room. And my mother's care, she said. Separate fund, he said. Irrevocable. Not tied to your employment. Not negotiable and not revocable, regardless of anything that happens between us professionally. She looked at him for a long time. I'm going to need that in writing, she said. Obviously, he said. I'm going to need lawyers, she said. My own, not yours, obviously, he said again. And I'm going to need you to understand, she said carefully, that if you ever again sit across a desk from me for 5 years, without knowing my mother's name, I will leave. He held her gaze. Her name is Denise, he said. She looked at him. I read the medical bills, he said, on your kitchen table. That first night, something moved through Imani's face quick and contained, the way emotions moved through her face when she allowed them to move at all, which was infrequently and always on her terms. She had a good day last week, Imani said. She recognized a photograph. She said my name. He listened. He didn't offer anything in response, no condolence, no optimism, no language that would arrive between her and the thing she was saying. He just listened. She looked at the flowers. She would have hated all of this, Imani said. The drama, the federal agents. A pause. She always said spectacle was for people who couldn't solve problems quietly. She wasn't wrong, Adrian said. She was also not entirely right, Imani said. Some problems need witnesses. He thought about 350 people in a ballroom looking at screens. Some problems do, he agreed. 3 weeks later, the first restructuring meeting took place in the main conference room on the 14th floor of Adrian's headquarters building. The room held 20 people, which was 12 fewer than the previous version of this meeting, because 12 of those seats had been occupied by people who were now either cooperating with federal investigators, facing charges, or had removed themselves from the situation. In the various ways people removed themselves when the structure they had been embedded in collapsed. 8 who remained were people Elias had cleared. Not perfect people, this was not an industry that produced perfect people. And Adrian had stopped expecting that years ago, if he had ever expected it at all, but people whose loyalty could be verified, whose actions under pressure had been observable, and who had demonstrated, in the specific crucible of the last month, which way they actually faced when facing was required. Elias was there. He looked tired in a way that was going to take months to not look. And he sat at the table with the particular watchfulness of a man who had recalibrated his trust parameters significantly and was still working out what the new settings felt like in practice. They had talked Adrian and Elias in the days after the ballroom. A long conversation in Elias's car, parked somewhere unremarkable, that had covered Minday and what it meant and what it didn't mean, and what the work of being Elias Moon was going to look like going forward. Conversation had not resolved everything. Adrian had not pretended it would. But it had been honest, in the way that 2 people who had worked together for 9 years and were going to keep working together could be honest without the performance of either absolution or blame, the actual material of the situation laid out between them. Elias was still there. That was what mattered. At 2 minutes past 10, the conference room door opened, and Imani Cross came in. She was walking without the cane. She had graduated to without the cane 4 days ago, which she had mentioned to no one, and which Adrian had noticed when she came through the door of a preliminary meeting, and her gait was different and she had not commented on it, and he had not commented on it, and they had proceeded with the meeting. As though the cane's absence was simply a fact of the room, rather than something that had taken 3 weeks of healing, and a level of physical stubbornness that most people would have found counterproductive. She sat down, not in her old seat, the chair slightly back, and to the left of the center position, the chair that was functionally the seat of someone who was present to serve, rather than to lead. She sat in the chair to Adrian's immediate right. The room noticed. The 8 people at that table registered the change with the varying degrees of subtlety of people who had spent careers learning to read rooms, and what they read in that room in the 30 seconds after Imani Cross sat down in that chair was that the meeting they were about to have was going to be organized differently than the meetings that had preceded it. Nobody said anything. Adrian opened the meeting. They covered 3 items. The federal timeline Sloan had confirmed that the primary arrest warrants had been executed and that the Financial Crimes Unit was working through the full evidence package, which was expected to produce additional charges over the next several months. The organizational restructuring, 4 new appointments, 2 promotions, 1 external hire being vetted, the gap left by 12 removed positions, being filled in the specific order of operational priority that Imani had mapped the week before. And the shipping operations, the vessel that had been designated for Adrian's post-wedding voyage had been detained, its replacement crew documented. 2 of Victor's men on that crew already providing statements to federal investigators. The boat that was supposed to make Adrian disappear was now evidence. Imani presented the restructuring plan. She presented it the way she did everything without preamble, without the performance of authority, just the material itself, organized to the precise degree required by the people who needed to act on it. She answered questions directly, and when she didn't have an answer, she said so, and identified who had the answer and how to get it, which was the specific competence of someone who had been the operational center of an organization for years and knew where every piece of it actually lived. The 8 people at the table listened. They asked questions. They received answers. The meeting was 45 minutes, which was shorter than any equivalent meeting in the organization's recent history, and when it ended, 3 of the 8 people stopped to speak to Imani directly on their way out, not deferentially, but collegially, the specific register of professional peers who had been in a room together and recognized something. Elias was last. He stopped at the door. He looked at Imani. The tourist situation, he said. She's clear. Documented and released the night of the event. Clean record. Good, Imani said. She said to tell you. He paused. He seemed to be editing something. She said to tell you she'd worked a lot of events. That one was different. Imani looked at him. Tell her I said, thank you, she said. Elias nodded. He looked at Adrian briefly. Then he left. Conference room was empty except for the 2 of them. Imani was gathering the materials from the meeting her own habit, the same as it had always been, clearing the table with the same efficiency she brought to everything, which was a habit so established that she did it without seeming to notice she was doing it. You don't have to do that, Adrian said. She stopped. She looked at what was in her hands. She set it down. Old habit, she said. I know, he said. She looked at the table. Going to be strange, she said. For a while. Yes, he said. The restructuring will create friction, she said. People who were comfortable in the previous arrangement are going to push back against the new one. Let them push, he said. Some of them are going to push against me, specifically, she said. Because of what I am and what I wasn't before. He looked at her. Let them push, he said again. And when they're done pushing, we'll see who's left. She looked at him. There was a quality to her expression, that he was learning to read the specific arrangement of her face when she was deciding whether to say the thing she was thinking or the version of it that required less from the conversation. Say it, he said. She looked slightly startled, not dramatically, just the small register of someone who hadn't expected to be read that precisely. 5 years, she said. I spent 5 years in a room with you, and you didn't. She stopped. Started differently. I used to wonder what it would take. For you to actually see me. Not the function. Me. He held her gaze. Nearly getting killed, he said. Apparently. She made a sound that was almost a laugh, short and dry and real. That's a very high bar, she said. I know, he said. I know what it cost. I know saying that doesn't resolve it. She was quiet. No, she said, it doesn't. A pause. But it's a start. The federal cases moved the way federal cases moved slowly, with the grinding institutional momentum of a process that was thorough by design and fast by no one's definition. Gabriel Kwon was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to the events surrounding the deaths of Adrian's parents, which was the charge that carried the most weight and the most uncertainty, given the age of the evidence and the difficulty of prosecuting a matter where the primary physical evidence had been destroyed for 2 decades. His attorney was very good. The case was going to be long and complicated, and would probably not produce the clean resolution that Adrian, if he was honest with himself, had briefly imagined it might. He had stopped imagining clean resolutions. Victor Rhee's financial network proved, as anticipated, to be the easier target documented in the way that financial crimes were documented when someone had spent 6 weeks mapping every connection and prosecuted by federal investigators who had been waiting for exactly this material for 4 years. Selena cooperated. She cooperated comprehensively and with the specific kind of detail that only came from someone who had been inside the architecture of a plan and knew where the structural supports were. Her cooperation produced 3 additional charges against Victor's organization and significantly simplified the case against 2 of his senior operatives. Her attorney had negotiated the terms of her cooperation. Adrian did not follow the details. He had said what he needed to say to Selena Rhee in a ballroom, and the rest of it belonged to the federal process. And he released it to that process the way you release something that had been heavy, not without awareness of the weight, but with the understanding that carrying it further served nothing. The evening he remembered most clearly came 6 weeks after the ballroom. He and Imani were on the terrace of the headquarters, building the one that faced the Hudson, 14 floors up, the city behind them, and the river and the dark weight of New Jersey across the water. It was cold in the way November got cold when the wind came off the water, and neither of them had dressed for it, which had produced a situation where they were both slightly too cold and neither of them had suggested going inside. She had been in the building until 8 o'clock. He had found her still at her desk, her new, the one outside the executive conference room, rather than the one outside his personal office, with its own assistant and its own filing system and its own separate calendar, and had said nothing except terrace, and she had looked at him and said 5 minutes, and had appeared on the terrace 7 minutes later, which was close enough. They stood at the railing. The Hudson was dark, except for the lights of a cargo vessel moving south at the kind of patient, enormous pace that large ships moved, and Adrian watched it go and thought about vessels and manifests and replaced crews and the machinery of a plan that had been constructed around him without his knowledge. And then he let himself stop thinking about it, because there was a point at which thinking about something further produced nothing except the continuation of the thinking. She said my name again, Imani said. He looked at her. My mother, she said, 3 days ago. I brought her a photograph, the one from my apartment, the old one, and she looked at it for a long time. And then she said Imani. She was looking at the river. Just the name, nothing else, but she said it, like she knew what it meant. He looked at her profile in the city light. What did you do? He said. I sat with her, she said. For 2 hours, I just sat there. He thought about what 2 hours looked like for Imani, for whom sitting without a task was a form of discipline she had to choose deliberately. Did it help? He said. Yes, she said. I don't know how. It just did. The cargo vessel moved south. The city did what it always did behind them. What do you need? He said. She glanced at him. What? In general, he said. Not from the organization. Not from the restructuring. What do you actually need? She looked at the river. I need this to work, she said. What we're building, I need it to be different from what it was. She paused. Not because of me, specifically. Because the old version was held up by people being invisible to each other. And that's a structural problem. And structural problems don't fix themselves. They don't, he agreed. I need the fund for my mother to be finalized by end of next week, she said. My attorney has the draft. It'll be done, he said. And I need... She stopped. Say it, he said, for the second time that month. She looked at him. I need you to understand that what I did, finding the evidence, staying, walking into that room, I didn't do it for a promotion, she said. I want to be clear about that. I did it because it was right, and because you didn't deserve what was coming, and because... She stopped again. Because some things are worth the cost, even when the cost is very high. He looked at her. I know that, he said. I need you to know it in a way that doesn't turn it into a debt, she said. Between us. I'm not owed. I'm not a creditor. I'm a person who made choices and is now in a different chair. Because of those choices, and because they were choices that should have been recognized years before they were. I understand, he said. Do you, she said. He thought about it. Not quickly, not with the speed of someone managing a conversation, but genuinely. I think I'm going to spend a long time understanding it more completely, he said. I think that's the honest version. She looked at him for a moment. That's the honest version, she agreed. They stood at the railing. The wind came off the water. Imani pulled her jacket tighter with one hand, the gesture of someone who was cold, but had decided to stay anyway, and looked at the lights of the river and the dark shapes of the things moving along it. The city's invisible logistics, working through the night the way it always worked, constant and enormous, and mostly unseen. Help me build what comes next, he said. Not behind me. Not in the chair that's slightly back from the table. Beside me. She looked at him. He looked back. I'm not going anywhere, she said. The words were simple. They were what they were, without weight added or subtracted, without the performance of a moment. She said them, the way she said things that she meant completely directly, without ceremony, as a statement of what was true. He understood the deeper layer of them. She had not gone anywhere in 5 years. She had been there, at the desk, and in the meetings, and in the work, when going would have been easier. And when staying had cost her things, he was only beginning to understand the full accounting of. She had not gone anywhere when she found the transfers, and understood what they meant. She had not gone anywhere on a bathroom floor. She had not gone anywhere when a photograph arrived with 4 words beneath it, and their timetable collapsed. She had walked into a ballroom on broken ribs, carrying the documentation of everything that had tried to destroy them both. And she had stood at the altar of his almost wedding and said her name to 350 people, and she had been seen, finally and completely, and in a room that could not look away. She had not gone anywhere. She was here now. The river moved below them. The city turned behind them. The cold came off the water, in the way it always did in November, indifferent and persistent, and Adrian Kwon stood on the terrace of the building he was rebuilding, alongside the woman he had spent 5 years failing to see, and he did not say anything else. There was nothing else to say. Some things were true without requiring language. She was beside him. He finally understood what that meant. The lights of the city scattered across the water below them, small and constant and innumerable, and neither of them moved, and the night held them there in the particular silence of 2 people who had come through something together, and were still standing on the other side of it, not unmarked, not unchanged, not pretending that what had been lost was not lost, or that what had been done could be undone, just standing, together, alive.